tax, that 20+% increase in the cost of essential goods and services. But if you take CBO's static scores, the cost of the bill is about $4.16 trillion. If you take the $1.7 trillion in savings, the largest spending reduction in the history of the United States by twofold, and you put a conservative growth rate, because CBO's growth rate is 1.8 in their baseline. That 1.8 is based on the last 4 years of failed economic policies and unbridled spending. It's not based on the policies embedded in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. President Trump grew the GDP by 1 percentage point from 1.8 to 2.8. Even Joe Biden had an annual average of 2.7. We put 2.6 in there as an assumption, which yields $2.6 trillion. The net effect is we reduced the deficit, and then some.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate you being here. God bless America and go West Texas.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Sewell for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Treasurer, Secretary of the Treasury. I actually, with all due respect, only get 5 minutes, so I'm going to ask, my constituents have sent me a list of questions that they just want yes or no answers to, and out of respect for the time and the fact that they want some clarity, I hope that you'll just say yes or no. The first question is, will the big, beautiful bill add to the national debt? Yes or no? Is that a yes or a no? That's a no? Yes?
Sorry?
What did you say? I'm sorry.
It remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, look, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, official score of this bill says that it increases the federal deficit by $2.4 trillion.
Sorry to interrupt, Congresswoman. The CBO also said that tariff income over the 10-year window would be $2.8 trillion.
You know,
so that would be
you want to talk about
dynamic
scoring and all that
stuff. There's nothing dynamic about that. You're quoting the CBO. I'm quoting the CBO. So let's level set.
We can level set, but the reality is that I have constituents back home who are really scared. They're scared that prices have gone up. This administration has promised that prices will go down. That absolutely has not occurred for them. And every time they hear the word tariff, they think of the fact that it's another tax on them that will be passed on to them for goods and services. At any rate, not only did the CBOs say that this bill will increase the deficit by $2.4 trillion. The Committee for Responsible Federal Budget said $2.5 trillion. The Yale Budget Lab, $2.4 trillion. The point I'm trying to make is that you will add to the national debt over the span of this time. The second question that they wanted me to ask is, will all Americans have a net benefit from this beautiful big bill?
It is it's difficult to.
Yes or no?
Again, it's impossible to say all Americans. It is ridiculous for me to give an answer for 337 million.
Well, I can
people.
tell you what a lot of
I can say the balance of probability is that Americans will get a substantial increase, especially if you're referring to working people in your district.
Yep.
They should do very well, as they did in
2018
and 2019.
Tables tell us? You know, the distribution the numbers don't lie. The average tax cut in 2027 for people in this bill making $1 million is about $81,500. So someone who makes $1 million, and no one in my district makes $1 million, to my knowledge, will get a tax increase, will get a tax benefit of $81,000. That's $223 a day. Now, the average tax rate in 2027 for people making under $50,000, which in my district is about 63% of the people that I represent, they will only get a tax break or tax increase of $265, which is 73 cents per day. That's pittance. When you think about the fact that the IRS, which this administration has decimated, closing field offices everywhere, laying off or dismissing thousands of workers from the IRS. The folks in my district often get, bombarded with inquiries about their earned income tax credits, and billionaires that are going to get $81,500 more don't. So, I mean, the point that I'm trying to make is that not all Americans will benefit the same. We know that because people make different things. But the fact of the matter is, if you're only saving me $268 and you're taking away my health care, you're taking away my health, which 16 million Americans will have no health care, will lose their health care, and they have to lose their health care in order for you guys to actually pay for your bill. I mean, to pay for your bill by kicking people off health insurance and giving them no health care, to me, is immoral and not fair. The last question that I was asked to ask you was, when will we hit the debt ceiling? I know that this big, beautiful bill also means a increase in the debt ceiling, and frankly, I heard you say that that is something that's an imperative. I would agree with that. When do we foresee us hitting the debt ceiling?
Congresswoman, I want to congratulate you. You have a very sophisticated constituency to ask questions like this. That the so-called X date is a...
With all due respect, just because you're poor doesn't mean you're ignorant.
As I said, very sophisticated.
Yeah,
It was
so can you answer the question?
I'm in the,
'Cause, I mean,
I'm
we
in
wanna
the
know-
habit of saying...
I'd like to know
I'm
whether
in
or
the
not
habit of
it's gonna
saying
be-
thank you to compliments. That the so-called X date is a moving target.
So when do you I mean, you're the Secretary of Treasury, so tell me, when do you predict, given where we are right now, will we hit the ceiling?
Some point in the middle to late summer.
Is that August, July?
Again, it is imprecise.
Well, sir, I just think that it is an abomination that we are actually giving bigger tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans who don't need a tax cut.
gentlewoman's time has
Meanwhile, we're
expired.
taking away food assistance and health care from people who desperately need it.
Gentlewoman's
Thank
time
you, and I
has
yield back.
expired. I now recognize Mr. Estes for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Secretary Bessent. Thank you for being here. I know I've been very busy in the last 2 days, and appreciate you coming back with struggling through the jet lag that you're obviously feeling. I just want to. I have some remarks here. I just want to throw out a couple of comments that have been talked about. I mean, and I believe you mentioned this earlier, is that after the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% went from paying only 40% of the tax burden to now paying over 46% of the tax burden. So as we've put in this good Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the top 1% are actually paying more. And I know a lot of questions from the other side of the aisle talked a lot about the deficit. And as you mentioned in your earlier remarks, the country's been fairly consistent in maintaining tax revenue at about a 17 to 18% of GDP. Unfortunately, the problem we're dealing with now is spending has ballooned up to roughly 23% or 24% of GDP, which is creating that problem that we have an imbalance. So I have several things I want to cover. First, I want to talk a little bit about Section 899. It's a common sense provision that's based on two bills that Chairman Smith and I introduced. It's not new. It's not revenge, as some in the media have been proclaiming and wailing about the last few weeks. It's a reasonable approach to make sure that foreign countries don't pilfer the U.S. Treasury with UTPRs or DSTs. And the fact is, if we do nothing, we're ceding our tax authority to other countries. And the JCT is warning us that we will lose $122 billion in tax revenue over the next 10 years. Ways and Means could have responded with much more severity in terms of the bill that we looked at. We took a measured approach that maintains our tax sovereignty and that either discourages our allies from moving forward with these discriminatory taxes, or will raise our tax revenues by $116 billion over the next 10 years. I'd like to submit, Mr. Chairman, for the record, an op-ed from Bloomberg that covered this topic. Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Secretary Bessent, are the fears that Wall Street has over the 899 grounded in truth, and what's behind the stir, and why wasn't there outcry from the Wall Street and economists during the last administration working with OECD in a manner that put America last?
Sir, I believe that there is quite a bit of misinformation on 899, and I also believe that if businesses came back, took a deep breath, and much of the pushback is coming from overseas companies, and overseas companies are worried that their countries may try to usurp U.S. authority. So if a European country, they tried to unfairly tax a U.S. company or take money away from the U.S. Treasury, then it would fall perhaps on that corporate. So they should look to their own capitals. This is a fiscal bill, not a revenge bill.
That's right, I agree with that. I think that some of these companies need to be lobbying their own government instead of trying to lobby the
100%,
House
Congressman.
administration. Something else that I've been pushing over the last 6 years has been research and development expensing. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit this Washington Examiner op-ed titled, "We're a Nation of Innovators, but our tax code no longer encourages it."
Without objection, so ordered.
Immediate expensing for research and development is a jobs provision, with 3/4 of the R&D expending spent on wages and salaries. Also has broad bipartisan support. I believe we need to provide businesses with certainty by making immediate write-off permanent, because it takes longer than 4 years to actually develop more new methods and technologies. Secretary, can you help explain why it's critical for our country to return to immediate R&D expensing, hopefully on a permanent basis as we finish this bill?
Sir, we are the undisputed technological leader in the world, from AI to life sciences. And one of the reasons for that has been the expensing of R&D, and we are pushing very hard to make this the best location for whether it is high-tech investing, whether it is biomedicine, or any other, the manufacturing process that we want to bring back. Part of the problem, I believe, is that the manufacturing process has been separated from the R&D process. So we need to have both of them here sitting side by side in the United States.
Yes, thank you. And there's so many other provisions I could do, but I'm out of time. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Del Bene is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Mr. Secretary, do you support the government having a consolidated database containing Americans' sensitive financial, health, and personal information?
I support protecting Americans.
Do you support the consolidated database?
I support protecting Americans' personal information
So
based on current law.
I think it's very concerning that you're not able to say no. This is not a partisan question. In fact, just last week, Republican Representative Warren Davidson responded to reports that DOJ is merging huge sets of data from across federal agencies into a centralized repository. He said it's dangerous when you start combining all those data points on an individual into one database. It's a power that history says will eventually be abused, end quote. Well, I could not agree more, and would also add that this kind of database would be a goldmine for malicious actors who are eager to exploit Americans' sensitive data. And Mr. Secretary, Section 6103 sets forth the confidentiality and disclosure rules for tax returns and tax information. Just because DOJ wants to compile people's sensitive information into one place doesn't mean the confidentiality rules go away. Is that correct?
We adhere to 6103.
So it seems like, you know, that should be a simple one too. We should absolutely be clear that the confidentiality rules did not go away. In fact, earlier in this hearing, you asserted that the Treasury Department is following, I think you said, the proper provisions within the Privacy Act, all proper provisions within the Privacy Act and Section 6103. So my question for you is, how can we be sure that's happening? I mean, especially knowing that the president illegally fired 18 inspectors general, including acting Treasury IG Sherba. How do we know? I'm sorry, you saying that isn't good enough. We're an oversight body. How do we know?
Again, I will say that we are following the law,
But we need, that's not good enough, Mr. Secretary. You should be coming, we should have officials within Treasury coming we should, and this is a statement to my colleagues on the other.
I'm here today.
But you're not answering how we know that. You're just saying we are. So
What would an acceptable
then let's
answer
bring,
to
then
how do
let's
we
bring
know
people
be?
who are building a database, let's go through the details of exactly what you are doing with that data, what protections are in place. We should have hearings doing that. In fact, we requested hearings on this from our partners on the other side of the aisle, refused to bring people from DOJ, et cetera, into this committee so we can be sure that, a consolidated database.
A judge in the Southern District of New York has ruled that all of our protocols are.
Mr. Secretary, we are a co-equal branch of government. We are the oversight body. I'm answering, I asked that question because it is part of my job not to have you just say it's okay.
If you won't take my word and a judge's
Then
word,
let's
I'm not
look at
sure
it.
how to satisfy.
I think because we actually have the authority to get that detail. We are oversight. We are not just here to have you say, don't worry about it. We are here to get detail. And I want you to be clear that it helps, this is a risk to the American people. This is sensitive personal information. There is no clarity on how this is being protected. Early on in this administration, people were given access to information with no controls. We have not had folks come into hearings. That's not good enough, Mr. Secretary, and I'm supportive of making sure that we are using technology in smart ways. I'm also very supportive of making sure that we are protecting people's personal information and we are following the law. 6103 is clear, and there is no, and now this consolidation, there's no approval on how this consolidation takes place, and you can't even be clear to me that you're about where you stand in terms of making that happening. So I don't think we're getting the information.
Maybe it did not filter up to you, but we provided a staff-level briefing several weeks ago.
Then let's bring folks, I want to ask the questions, frankly. It's not about whether or not you had a staff level briefing. Let's bring experts to answer detailed questions in this body so that we get those answers. You know, I have a technology background. I'm happy to have those detailed conversations of exactly who's given access, how that access is given, and how we are making sure that information is protected. We absolutely have to make sure that there are no violations, that there are the right protocols put in place. We have no data to say that. We just have, you're saying, just trust me, it's okay. That's not good enough. And Mr. Chairman,
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I now recognize Mr. Smucker for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being with us. And congratulations on what appears to be a great deal with China potentially, and a reset of our relationship, and a deal that'll be great for American business,
It's an
American
excellent
workers.
start, Congressman, but a start.
Yeah, I'm really continue to be proud of the work that we've done with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the impact that it had on my constituents, where average families in my district saw an increase of about $6,000 in their wages in the years following that. Inflation was low. I'll put up any day the record of the previous Trump administration with what we've seen, the disaster that we've seen in this past administration. And so grateful to have the opportunity to work with you to extend those benefits once again to every American. And we're hearing a lot from the other side here today on things that just they're falsehoods about the bill, things that are not in this bill. And I just want to remind our listeners what Democrats are voting for by voting against this bill. They will be voting for a vote against this bill is a vote for the largest tax increase in American history, a tax increase that will affect average households at every tax bracket level. They're voting for a decrease, in fact, a 50% decrease in the child tax credit, which is so important, provides important relief to every American family. They're voting for allowing Medicaid dollars to go to people who are here in the country illegally at the expense of American citizens.
Yes, sir, 1.4 million of them.
And they are voting to allow Medicaid dollars that are intended for people who really need them to go to individuals who could be working but choose not to.
They are voting for Medicaid benefits not to go to women and children as they should.
They're also voting against policies they voted for before that will be critical to grow this economy and provide additional opportunity. Policies like full expensing, they voted for that last cycle or last session. Full deductibility of R&D, full expensing, I mentioned full expensing, and then we're adding full expensing for structures, which will re-energize American manufacturing. All of the things Democrats will be voting against by voting against this bill.
Yes, sir.
So I want to again say that we're doing this is going to be beneficial to every American, and we're also doing it in a responsible way by finding savings that will drive more efficiencies in some of these programs, but will ensure that we will not add to the debt, assuming we meet very, I think, conservative estimates on growth. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir. And to go back to the CBO, the CBO produces a black box. And that black box says the growth is 1.7 or 1.8%, whether we make the TCJA permanent and continue, and that permanence causes stimulus, or, as you said, whether we have the largest tax cut in history, which would be cataclysmic, obviously, but it also assumes no change in growth. So obviously, both cannot be true.
Exactly right. So we're going to do this in a fiscally responsible way. Now, I do have one question for you, and I only have a minute left. One of the things that I was impressed with when, during your confirmation hearings and leading up to your appointment as secretary was your 3-3-3 plan. And particularly in the short amount of time I have, you have a stated goal at that time, at least, of getting to the deficit at being at 3% of GDP, which I know how much you're concerned about the debt. The Democrats today are raising concerns about the debt. I share those concerns. I think that's a great goal. Do you still hope to achieve that 3% debt to GDP, deficit to GDP by the end of Trump's term?
Yes, sir. It's a deficit to GDP, which the other side of the aisle doesn't seem to want to talk about, or the total debt to GDP, which Secretary Yellen and I agree on. It is those two numbers that matter. The absolute number, while daunting, those two ratios are much more important. And I said that we would like to have a 3 in front of the deficit to GDP by 2028, the end of President Trump's term, which is the long-term average.
And I think this sets,
Gentleman's time has expired.
This sets the basis for being able to achieve that. But there's going to be a lot more work to do, and I look forward to working with you to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Chu for 5 minutes.
Secretary Bessent, my constituents are sick with worry about losing their health care coverage. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office just determined that more people will lose their coverage. 16 million people will lose their coverage as a result of this big, ugly bill, which will be the largest loss of health care coverage for people in American history. Now, Republicans are saying that this will all be accomplished by cutting out waste, fraud, and abuse. But we should not be fooled. This is accomplished by 30 different measures, including increasing the amount of red tape that people will have to go through just to stay on Medicaid and on the Affordable Care Act, or the ACA. In addition, the CBO says that this bill will cost Medicare over $500 billion. I think of the many grandmothers and grandfathers who need nursing facilities as they face various illnesses like dementia or Alzheimer's. In my district, 62% of them rely on Medicaid to get any kind of care. But this bill requires all kinds of new paperwork to stay on these programs, including paperwork for seniors seeking to dually enroll in Medicaid and Medicare. Where will these seniors go if they lose their Medicaid because they didn't file yet another form, all while having dementia? This is a life or death situation. But I guess Republicans believe, as Senator Joni Ernst said, well, we're all going to have to die. And then there is the ACA. I remember what it was like before the ACA, where people could not get health insurance if they had a pre-existing condition, like everyday conditions like asthma or even pregnancy. The ACA provided tremendous relief to millions. But this big, ugly bill will require even more red tape to stay on the ACA. It demands that 2.5 million people, like gig workers, like Uber drivers, who don't even know what they'll earn in a week accurately, estimate their income for the next year. It requires people to re-enroll year after year rather than having an automatic enrollment, which is not required by any health insurance or Medicare. It reduces enrollment periods so it can cut people off the program. And it takes away the premium tax credits that helped millions of families afford health coverage. And that is why at the hearing for this bill, I introduced an amendment to strike the provisions that undermine the coverage of the ACA. Every single Republican on this committee voted no. So Secretary Bessent, I'm asking you a question in which I only want a yes or no answer. How would you have voted on my amendment to protect the ACA and keep millions on their health insurance?
No.
Okay, that makes it clear. And Secretary Bessent, I'd like to address the reason that 16 million people are going to lose their health care coverage. It's so that millionaires and billionaires can get big tax giveaways and become even richer. The nonpartisan Joint Committee on Taxation just this week found that if this bill becomes law, the richest 5% of taxpayers in this country will get a bigger tax cut than the bottom 80% of taxpayers combined. To put dollar amounts on it, someone earning $1 million will get a tax giveaway of $81,500 in just 1 year, while someone earning less than $50,000 can only expect $265 in 1 year, which is only 73 cents a day. That millionaire will get a tax cut in 1 day that's almost as big as what the middle-class person will get over the entire year. And of course, this does not account for the burden of paying more for basic necessities because of Trump's tariffs, nor does it account for the loss of life-saving benefits like Medicaid coverage or SNAP food assistance. When the University of Pennsylvania included the benefit cuts into their analysis, they found that the poorest 20% of households in this country will lose $30,000 over their lifetime if this bill gets signed into law. It's quite literally a reverse Robin Hood scheme, taking from the poor and giving to the ultra-rich. That's why I had an amendment that said there should not be tax giveaways for those earning more than $10 million per year. And so, Secretary Bessent, I only want a yes or no answer. Would you have voted yes or no on my amendment?
Again, no.
I yield back.
Mr. Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again. Thanks for sitting here. Your predecessor, Janet Yellen, pushed Congress for the last 4 years to adopt the OECD global tax deal. I'm grateful that you and the administration have been working to stop this. There's a lot going on in that space. And as the current global tax deal is formulated, U.S. multinationals are disadvantaged in two critical ways. First, they face 2 layers of minimum taxes, the existing robust U.S. system and the emerging OECD system. And 2, their traditional income-based tax incentives face stricter scrutiny against the corporate welfare regimes in China and the EU. The global tax deal fosters a kind of a Hunger Games style race for government handouts, cash subsidies, and refundable tax credits. The system rewards political connections and authoritarian regimes over innovation. And Mr. Secretary, as you know, countries are pressuring the U.S. to sign on to the global tax deal and want to push subsidies out of the income tax system into the hands of bureaucrats, distorting markets, picking winners and losers, and leaving their taxpayers footing the bill for political pet projects with dismal economic results. If other nations want to tie their economies in knots with that nonsense, that's their funeral. The U.S. should not play the role of global nanny, dictating domestic policy to sovereign states. Countries around the world are free to determine a domestic policy that meets their political and economic demands, but not at the expense of the U.S. taxpayer and our great U.S. companies. My concern, Mr. Secretary, is that there is an on and off switch associated with the implementation of this global tax deal. A lot of uncertainty of what's happening after your time in office and the President's time in office. The tax sovereignty of this nation is under attack. The last administration gave away U.S. leverage trying to sell the jurisdiction and purview of this committee to the OECD in Paris. We must not let that happen. The global tax deal isn't just a friendly suggestion, it's a loaded gun aimed at countries that don't join the cabal. I, for one, don't want the U.S. to be looking at the end of their loaded gun under the next administration or the one after that. Mr. Secretary, will you commit to working with us to put a nail in this coffin on the global tax deal once and for all?
My staff met with the OECD in Paris just last week, and we are pushing back and working toward a solution as soon as possible, Congressman.
Thank you for your work on that. And then one last thing, the current tax code has certainly been biased against investments and structures, and I've been working on this issue for a number of years since I've been on the Ways and Means, including a bill I introduced that implements a neutral cost recovery for structures. While we should continue to do more in this space to drive down the cost of investment in structures, and I know that's part of the big plan to get manufacturing back here quickly, I'm happy that we're moving in this right direction. And long depreciation schedules, as you know and as you've worked on, erode the value of deductions, hindering growth in our domestic manufacturing. The provision that we included in the big one, beautiful bill that allowed full expensing of factories coupled with restoration of 100% expensing for equipment and machinery will be crucial for the President Trump's agenda to boost American manufacturing. We're hearing a lot of great things about that. Mr. Secretary, I want to reiterate my thanks, certainly the Republican Party's thanks for your immense support in this provision to implement full expensing of factories. And I'd like to yield the rest of my time to you to just talk about why that is so important to move quickly on this to get it done and what it's going to do for our economy.
Congressman, it provides great surety, but more than that, it provides the impetus for businesses to make capital allocation very quickly, and in a way, it puts us on an even playing field with the countries that heavily subsidize their industry. In the United States, we try not to, some administrations, like the past one, try to pick winners and losers. We do not. We try to set the best playing field and create the best environment. So the surety of immediate expensing is very powerful in terms of after-tax return on capital. After-tax return on capital is what drives this economy, it is what drives productivity, and it is what makes the United States the greatest economy in the world.
Mr. Secretary, again, thank you for being here. Appreciate your words, and I yield back.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield 5 seconds to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Sanchez.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. I would ask unanimous consent to enter into the record the Nonpartisan Policy Research Yale Budget Lab analysis, which shows that $3,000 cut to household income because of Trump's tariffs.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield back to Ms. Moore.
The Yale Budget Lab is staffed by
Thank you. This is my time,
former
sir.
Biden officials.
Where's the gavel, Mr. Chairman? He's taking up my time.
Proceed. The clock's moving, Ms. Moore.
Thank you. I want to join my colleagues on a bipartisan basis in regaling the life and times of Charlie Rangel. And actually, Mr. Chairman, were he alive today, today would be his 95th birthday. And you know, even if it weren't his birthday, I would have to have thought of Charlie Rangel at this moment and the last real close personal conversation that I had with him when I considered your testimony here today, Mr. Secretary, and some of the other sorts of inquiries and comments of my colleagues here when they talked about the averages. The average taxpayer is going to receive this or that. It's sort of like the example that you almost gave here, one taxpayer gets $1 million tax refund, another one gets a $1 tax refund, and then the average tax refund is $500,050. I had a Jesuit education, so we learned about the tyranny of averages. You ignore the distribution and outliers. You mask variations and inequalities. It's asymmetrically distributed. It's skewed. Because you have heard my colleagues talk about the real impact. Somebody under $50,000 a year is going to get $265 versus others that get millions. That is not a question, that was my comment. Okay, so you and Doge were focused on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. So let me just sort of outline some of the waste, fraud, and abuse that you found and tell me yes or no, was this what you found? $641 billion in subsidies for the ACA, $764 billion in Medicaid cuts, $300 billion in SNAP cuts, and then triggering $500 billion in Medicare cuts. Was that all waste, fraud, and abuse? Yes or no?
Again, ma'am, it's very, very difficult to give a yes or
those are the cuts. Okay, I'll move on. You're not going to answer.
Very, very difficult.
What I'd like to know is the $2.4 billion in debt and the tax increases of $4.5 trillion. Is that not spending? Are tax cuts spending and creating, especially, not just adding to the debt, but the interest rates on the debt? Is that or is that not spending, yes or no? Are tax cuts, if I give you a tax cut, am I spending out of the Treasury to do that? Yes or no?
Not if we,
Mr. Secretary.
not if we create more income
Okay,
than the nature of
we're
the
talking about a gambler's fallacy with projecting growth that's never been proven by anybody, anything. So I will move on because I see my time is waning. Let me ask you some more questions. Do you think that a problem we have in our tax code is that we have $700 billion a year in a tax gap because the very wealthy are evading illegally their tax responsibilities? Is that or is that not waste, fraud, and abuse? Would you characterize that as waste, fraud, and abuse? I'm just a simple question. Is that waste, fraud, and abuse?
My priorities are collection, privacy, and customer service.
Okay, so but we're not collecting that. And you cut 31% of the budget from the IRS that would have actually, processed these claims.
The largest budget cut was in the IT department that began the modernization in 1990.
Okay, the
and
true cost of economic security
billion.
Has determined that 50% of Americans are financially insecure. 50% of Americans. So do you think that any of them are going to suffer from the cuts in Medicaid, SNAP, and ACA not to have these resources available to them, yes or no?
I believe that they will be better
off without these
under
resources.
this tax bill, just as they were under President Trump's last term, as opposed to the ravages of inflation under President Biden's term.
Well, let me just ask this. Why is this bill designed to take away some of the benefits that you claim people are going to have? They expire, like the senior tax credit expires, all of these things that these families are supposed to get. If you're so into uplifting their needs, why do they expire?
No tax on tips.
No tax on tips expires.
Sorry?
It expires. And it's not really a decrease on tax on tips.
If you would like to join me in making it permanent and have your Democratic
you're
colleagues
the secretary. You're the secretary, sir. You wrote the budget.
We would welcome you to join us.
Excuse me?
We would welcome you to join us.
I'm ready to join you right now. Are you going to accept an amendment?
Time has expired, Ms. Moore, by over a minute. I was very generous, but way too
Mr. Chairman, you are always very generous. Let's be clear. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. The chair would like to inform the members that the committee will stand in recess for 10 minutes following Ms. Miller's time. Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm from West Virginia, and I'm going to give you a little Southern love. I graduated from Columbia College. My husband graduated from the Citadel. So we've got some roots in common there. Thank you for being here today. You know, after 4 years of inflation and unmonitored spending and non-existent trade negotiations under the previous administration, I'm thrilled to have you and President Trump back at the helm to deliver on America First policies. Having businessmen rather than career politicians running the country is already making a huge difference. Ways and Means Republicans have spent the better part of 2 years gearing up to reauthorize the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act and put more pro-working class tax policies in place. This committee passed the most significant tax bill in modern history last month, and the House followed suit. It is now time for the Senate to do their job and get this big, beautiful bill to the president's desk. I want to talk about 1099-K. One of my top priorities in the tax package is to repeal the Democrats' absurd 1099-K threshold. Under the Biden administration, Democrats changed the time-tested standard of $20,000 in 200 transactions to $600 when determining whether a taxpayer receives a 1099-K or not. Before this committee, your predecessor acknowledged that this new threshold would be difficult to administer and to lead to the taxpayers' confusion. So instead of working with us to fix it, the Biden Treasury unconstitutionally delayed implementation and then changed the threshold to try and ease the taxpayers' confusion in the election year. Unfortunately, there are still millions more 1099-K forms that were sent out, and Republicans have worked to restore the 1099-K threshold to the time-tested standard of $20,000 in 200 transactions by including my Saving Gig Economy Taxpayer Act in the One Big Beautiful Bill. Can you shed some light on how this policy and others being produced from your department will make life easier for our taxpayers?
Representative, thank you for discussing these very important issues. As I said, I believe the underappreciated part of President Trump's economic plan is the deregulation. And what you were describing, the cutting back on paperwork, that putting thresholds at proper level is indeed deregulation, lower paperwork. And I think you correctly pointed out that the previous administration, I'm not sure that anyone ever signed the front of a paycheck or the back of a paycheck. I think they mostly received direct deposit from the U.S. government because they're always government employees. So if you have never made payroll, if you are not processing paperwork, you don't understand the costs that are inherent in this. If you are a small business person, if you are someone with a lawn care business, if you are someone, as you said, we have a completely new economy today with the gig economy. Whether it is Uber drivers, delivery people, the contract workers who work from home, in programming fields. So I think that it was tone deaf, completely tone deaf, for the nature of the new economy.
You are so right. And I also want to voice my support for the ongoing trade negotiations that the President and you are working on. For too long, our trusted trade partners have quietly taken advantage of the United States. And I'm a firm believer that trade truly is the great equalizer and a powerful tool to bring the world together. However, sometimes the tool can be used effectively and not always with fairness. I'm particularly interested in the domestic steel industry. From West Virginia, we've been producing quality steel for decades, and some in my hometown in Huntington and my district is currently ramping up more steel production even further with new mills in Mason County. So I'm supportive of the Section 232 tariffs on steel that the President has pursued, and I'm eager to work together with the administration to ensure that a level playing field is also applied to the U.S.-UK economic prosperity deal. The UK has a history of subsidizing its steel industry. which in turn often undercuts our domestic steel producers. Can you commit to continuing working on securing fairness for our domestic steel industry across trade deals?
Representative Miller, I had the privilege of being with the president at the U.S. Steel factory in Pittsburgh a week ago Friday. And I can tell you that the president's commitment to the U.S. steel industry is unwavering, that we are bringing back domestic production. And what we have seen, and one of the previous questions about is China a reliable partner, what we have seen during COVID since then is that there are strategic industries in the United States where we must have an industrial base. And I would put steel in the top 3.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The committee will stand in recess for exactly 10 minutes. Ready. The committee will come to order. We'll continue with questioning. Mr. Boyle.
I'm sorry, but I just can't stand it anymore. This massive, outrageous, pork-filled spending bill is a disgusting abomination. Shame on those who voted for it. You know you did wrong. You know it. Those were the words of your former White House colleague and good friend, Elon Musk. This spending bill contains the largest increase in debt ceiling in U.S. history. It is the debt slavery bill. A new spending bill should be drafted that doesn't massively grow the deficit and increase the debt ceiling by $5 trillion. Why do you believe Mr. Musk is right or wrong?
I think you'd have to ask Mr. Musk.
Well, take the substance of what he said. Does it not add trillions of dollars, your bill, to the deficit and debt?
It's not my belief that it does. It may be his. He could speak for himself.
But of course, it's not just Mr. Musk. It is the Congressional Budget Office. It is conservative-leaning groups like Tax Foundation, Cato, left-leaning groups, and nonpartisan groups like CBO and JCT. So this bill has actually united the left, the right, and the center, all saying it massively increases deficit and debt. But they're all wrong and you're right?
Congressman, I think that there are a range of outcomes that I think that many do not include the pro-growth measures, just as they were wrong with the original TCJA, and that has proven to be a resounding success. Just as I don't know if you were here to vote for the IRA, the CBO scoring on that, it has been 3 to 4 times more expensive.
So it's curious to me because you spent decades as an executive at George Soros's hedge fund, being very successful, making billions of dollars. Back then, you would always rail against deficit and debt. What's happened?
Again, that it is smart spending. That what are we spending for? Are we
tax cuts that mostly go to billionaires such as yourself? while throwing 16 million people off their health care coverage.
Well, I would dispute that 16 million. I think you're conflating a lot of numbers.
No, it's the, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Those aren't my numbers. Just to be clear, as you know, it's the Congressional Budget Office projection.
I think you're adding up a lot of numbers that shouldn't be added.
Excuse me, I am adding two specific numbers. The cuts CBO found coming to Medicaid. No, if we're entitled to our own opinions, but not our own facts and not our own numbers. The CBO shows that 10.9 million will lose their health care coverage from the Medicaid cuts, and another 5.1 million will lose their health care coverage due to the ACA cuts. 10.9 plus 5.1 is 16 million.
So you are adding numbers. 1.4 million.
Yes, correctly.
Do you support Medicaid for illegal aliens? 1.4
I am
million?
asking the questions, not you. Although you'll be happy to know that in my Commonwealth, home state, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, actually they check your citizenship status before you can enroll in Medicaid. But I understand why you're wanting to divert and change the subject. Let me move, since we've taken up already most of my time. The World Bank yesterday had a shocking growth projection. They slashed their growth projection for the United States by upwards of 40%. I'm just curious, do you agree or do you think they're wrong as well? Because they specifically cited the trade uncertainty caused by your administration, the administration that you serve as Secretary of the Treasury, as being the primary reason why they've had to slash their growth projection to the lowest since 2008.
Congressman, you kindly cited the success that I may or may not have had in my previous career, but I could tell you I would not have had it if I followed World Bank projections.
So it is interesting that you believe all of these groups are wrong, from your former colleague Elon Musk, to left-leaning groups, to right-leaning groups, to center groups, to the World Bank. Everything is going hunky-dory. The reality is, I can see why you would have that opinion. You, as a billionaire, will reap the rewards of this tax cut, while 16 million Americans will lose their health coverage. That is the sad reality of the situation.
We could look at who would be most harmed if these tax cuts expire.
Well, you'll be happy to know that on this Democratic side of the dais, through an 18-hour markup, every single Democratic member voted to extend the tax cuts for everyone making under $1 billion. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Dr. Murphy.
Thank you, Secretary, for coming, and I apologize for the bellicose manner in which you're being treated. I think if we all want respectful parlay and we actually want to learn things, we do it respectfully. You know, I'm just going to take a side. I am a physician in healthcare. I always want everybody to be able to access healthcare. But if I can say three words: illegal, ineligible, and able. So let's go to the illegal part first. The last party let in anywhere between 13 and 20 million people in this country illegally, and now they're placing their healthcare burden on the rest of the American country. So let's talk about the illegals, providing health care for illegals. By the way, those aren't American citizens. 2, ineligible. Last administration did not allow states to audit their Medicaid rolls. Guess what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to say, hey, you're still fit eligibility, you're an impoverished child, you're a pregnant woman, you're a disabled person, you're an impoverished senior citizen, you are eligible. But if you're not, you are not eligible for Medicaid, period. Able-bodied. Who can be against able-bodied individuals working to get health care? I mean, my gosh. So I'm hearing this ridiculous statistic of 16 million people who should not be eligible, who are not eligible. It is just embarrassing every time they bring this thing up. So anyway, you know, I do want to get back to the fact that our nation now, and this is blames on Republicans and Democrats, has gone far too long as far as where our economy is. We become a service economy. We become a government employment economy. We make some things, we assemble other things, but we don't manufacture things. We've talked about this. I look at this at what's happened in North Carolina, the drying up of cities, especially in the East. I want to talk a little bit about tariffs, and this is a difficult discussion. I'm hearing more and more from manufacturers in North Carolina that the tariffs in the short term are harming them. Specifically, tariffs on inputs used in manufacturing, driving up costs and making products uncompetitive when exporting to third country markets. These export markets are highly competitive, and U.S. companies have to compete with the EU, with China, other countries to be able to offer their products cheaper. who can offer their products cheaper than U.S. I really just would like to know how we're going to navigate this. I really believe our tariff policy was necessary. You can only affect economic policy by one of two ways: militarily, which no one wants, or by tariffs. And to get our country reversed back on a path it should be, we have to do this. But help me understand how the U.S. is going to help our companies in this difficult time remain their competitiveness.
Well, Congressman, as I discussed earlier, the most powerful thing we're going to do is give them great certainty and permanence in this tax bill. We will also allow 100% expensing, both for the new equipment and for factory structures, and that will provide a substantial savings and impetus. So I believe that that will aid in the manufacturing here. We are also working with industry, and again, it is across a wide range that we will see. Some companies will make less, some will make more.
Right. I appreciate that. You know, I love to see our growth in our manufacturing. During the last administration, we had 3 to 7 million individuals who are able-bodied adult of working age come off of the workforce. We need workers. And guess what? Some of those people will come off Medicaid and actually get insurance by their jobs. So again, just a little bit of truth. Real quickly.
And Congressman, as I said earlier, that we have approximately 9% of the workforce that is in manufacturing. Historically, real wage increases accrue to manufacturing workers faster than lower-end service economy workers. So I think we could still see real wage growth there also.
Right, facts matter. Quickly, I'd like to talk to you about transshipment. Transshipment by Chinese companies have undermined President Trump's Section 301 tariffs, and the problem seems to be getting worse. Can you elaborate by any chance if any discussion with China was done about transshipment, or is that in order? Is that going to be discussed?
Well, as you can imagine, they pushed back on the de minimis exemption, which we have gotten rid of, and we are going to, we are tariffing all the de minimis imports. We are going to set a level, and it will be a global level, not only for Chinese imports, although China floods the zone, because that is their business model, is to export their deflationary impulse, which is unacceptable to the rest of the world, especially for U.S. citizens. So we are going to set a global level for these de minimis imports.
Thank you. It's nice to see an administration actually do something on trade. We did nothing in the last 4 years, and I'm sorry if it hurts people's feelings that they've tariffed against us and we're retaliating, trying to do things better for the American people. Support what you do, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr.
Kustoff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today and after your long days of travel. So thank you very much for being here. If I could ask you, Mr. Secretary, there's been a lot of attention lately and a lot of conversation around the bond markets and rising yields for U.S. Treasuries. If I could get you to address that, maybe some reassurance. Maybe a couple of questions. First of all, what is your current assessment of the bond markets and your view of the upward pressure on Treasury yields recently?
Congressman, if I could break that down into three pieces. One is the smooth functioning of the bond market. So even during the April high volume, high volatility period, the bond markets functioned very well, trades cleared. There was never a question of financial stability. Two, at Treasury, our bond issuance is going quite well. We are actually seeing an uptick in primary purchasers as opposed to, so these are the end users who would hold it as opposed to dealers or flippers. And then three, as I said earlier, the United States 10-year is the only major 10-year yield in the world that is down on the year, So for all the sky is falling and cries of what's happening, or that a crisis is inevitable, the U.S. continues to be the most stable bond market.
Mayor, you've had a lot of questions today about the One Big Beautiful Bill, and a lot of questions, very detailed questions. What would happen to the economy if Congress were to fail to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill and the majority of the tax cuts from 2017 were to expire?
Well, again, Congressman, there are two parts there. So one, the OBBB, as I call it, contains the debt ceiling raise and extension. So that cannot happen. That must be raised and extended. And so we will not even talk about the ramifications of that because it will never happen. Two, as I said, it would be an economic sudden stop where we would see a cataclysmic event for working Americans, for job creation, for the financial system. So it's unthinkable that this could happen. It would be the largest tax increase in history. And again, I'm not necessarily, I was criticized for my criticism of the CBO. I'm not necessarily going after the men and women who work there. I'm going after their insufficient models, because their insufficient models say that if we make permanent the tax bill, that we don't get an increase in growth. But to your point, if somehow the One Big Beautiful Bill were not passed, that growth will remain the same, which is obviously the ridiculous assumption.
Wouldn't it be devastating for the economy if we failed to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill?
Sir, I think it could set off the financial crisis, the likes of which we have not seen since 08-09.
Mr. Secretary, you would rather be Treasury Secretary than Chairman of the Federal Reserve, wouldn't you?
Sir, I think I have, with the, other than some congressional reporting, the best job in Washington. And I am happy to do what President Trump wants me to do. And I think that we are making great progress at Treasury. I can tell you that having been in the business building now since January 28th, the professional staff is incredible, incredible. And the political staff that we brought in, everyone is working well together. We are working to enhance the economy for the American people, maintain the reserve status of the U.S. dollar, and to your first question, make sure that the U.S. Treasury market, which is the largest and soundest and bellwether for the world, maintains that status. And I would like to stay in my seat through 2029 to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Secretary, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have repeatedly said that there are no outside experts who support the One Big Beautiful Bill, and I would like to correct that for the record for a moment. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'd like to submit for the record a letter that was sent to President Trump, Speaker Mike Johnson, and Leader John Thune on June 3rd, showing 300 economists' support for the One Big Beautiful Bill. They urge speedy adoption of legislation to enact pro-growth tax policies. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to submit that for the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Good, and Congressman, I believe I may have been in London when that was published, so I look forward to perusing the names of the economists on that list.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the role of the Secretary of the Treasury is one of the most important and consequential in the entire federal government. You're responsible for our nation's economic prosperity, for ensuring the stability of our financial systems, and you're a successful guy with an Ivy League education. Well, I would assume that you would understand that to execute on these objectives, you must apply foundational, widely acceptable principles to support economic growth. For example, a climate of economic stability and predictability, ensuring the economy has a strong and stable workforce, supporting science and innovation, and much more. Yet at every turn, your policies fly in the face of these basic principles. The erratic tariffs have thrown the markets and consumer confidence into free fall, while driving up costs for businesses and consumers alike. The misguided and cruel immigration policies of this administration are forcing highly skilled talent to seek opportunities outside of the U.S. and have left businesses across the country without workers they need and our communities depend upon. And the indiscriminate slashing of our libraries, medical research centers, NIH, the National Science Foundation, have forced our scientific progress backwards. At the same time, your public comments about the state of the economy suggest you don't even understand the severity of the damage that you're causing. For example, for months, despite every indication to the contrary, you've suggested the U.S. dollar is not weakening, but instead that currencies of other countries are growing stronger. This might be more credible if the dollar hadn't weakened against gold most of all. That's akin to suggesting our sea levels aren't rising, that the land is shrinking. Demand for treasuries is weakening and the markets aren't buying what you're selling. The only time the markets have reacted positively is when the administration is in retreat from key policy areas. I want to say, given your successful past, isn't this embarrassing?
Is there a question there, sir?
There's a question. Isn't this embarrassing?
Oh, is it embarrassing? Well, I'm sorry, Congressman, but you seem not to have seen the economic data. The GDP growth has been quite substantial. Job growth is solid.
GDP growth is half what it was last year, sir.
The job growth is solid, and we had
job growth is a third what it was all last year, sir.
No. And private sector job growth especially. And if you'd like to talk about inflation, would you?
The inflation has been coming down. Just the inflation is good so far. We will see every economic thing I read, which is much every day, suggests the impact of the tariffs is not hit yet.
Well, why don't we look at the data rather than the hysteria, which is how I made my career.
Let me move on. You like to use the phrase strategic uncertainty as a justification for the tariff mess, pretending that the erratic policies have been the result of a clever, thoughtful plan, which is impossible to believe. There's a common assertion with these tariffs that I'm struggling to understand. The committee just passed a reconciliation bill that's going to explode the deficit by almost $3 trillion. The president tells us that's just fine because according to the CBO, if all of his tariffs policies remain in place, we're going to see $2.8 trillion in new taxes from the tariffs. You used that number earlier today over the next 10 years. But here's my question. If you're supposedly cutting all these deals, 90 deals in 90 days, and the president's going to retain the power to adjust tariffs on a whim, how can we reasonably expect that those $2.8 trillion in new tariff revenues are going to be real? Isn't this just one more example of how the lack of a plan is going to lead to an explosion in the nation's debt? How do you have your cake and eat it too? Well, you claim the tariff revenue is going to offset the increase in debt, and yet you also say you're going to get rid of that tariff revenue by negotiating 90 new deals.
Well, Congressman, two things. It sounds like you're questioning the CBO because that's a CBO score, not my number.
You used it today.
Yeah, but it's the CBO score. So if you want to use CBO, let's use CBO. They're claiming $2.4 trillion in new debt, and they're also saying 2.8 in tariff income. Even in Washington math, that's plus 400 billion.
That does miss the 500 billion in new interest on the debt, which takes it up to 3 trillion. But
So
finally,
you don't agree with the CBO either.
In my 45 seconds, your counterpart, Secretary Lutnick, recently declared on television that Trump's president's tariffs are not going away, quote unquote, even with your deal on China that you announced. Secretary Lutnick was asked by Senator Kennedy if he'd accept a deal that removed trade barriers for places like Vietnam, and he gave an answer that was frankly all over the place and difficult to understand. We're less than a month away from Liberation Day Part 2. Very few of the trade deals have been announced yet. I think most people in Congress and around the world would like to know what's going on. Should America be preparing for Liberation Day 2.0? What do we plan for July 9th and July 2nd?
I would say, as I have repeatedly said, that there are 18 important trading partners. We are working toward deals on those, and it is highly likely that those countries that are or trading blocs, as in the case of the EU, who are negotiating in good faith, we will roll the date forward to continue good faith negotiations. If someone is not negotiating, then we will not.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Stubbe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the the Democrats and the left continue to say that this is just a tax cut for billionaires. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond to that.
Sir, as we saw last time, the impetus or the higher collections were on the upper bracket. So the top 10%, the top 1% pay more. If I weigh 200 pounds and my sister weighs 100 pounds, which is approximately right, and we both lose 10% weight, then I lose 20 pounds and she loses 10. So they prefer to speak in absolute rather than percentages. So the percent increase, as the Congressman Arrington said earlier, that we went from approximately the top 10% paying 38% to 45%. So that it's a very loud talking point that lacks all logic.
And so who would be hurt the most if Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act expires?
As I have said, a sudden stop in the economy always hurts the working Americans. So the bottom 50% of wage earners would be hurt by far the most, as they always are. And on the other side, they will be helped the most, as they were during the first Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. The working Americans did better. The minority households did better. Working households saw a substantial increase in their household net worth compared to the household net worth increase of the top 10%. So again, in percentage terms, which is what matters, and Congressman, what also matters is how much do Americans keep? What is the return? Because we just experienced this great inflation. The statistics said that inflation was 21%. The goods basket for most Americans, because it includes the cars, insurance, groceries, was in excess of 30%. So that inflation, they're still trying to recover from this affordability crisis. And as I said earlier, there are two ways to recover from that. Lower the prices, which we're working hard to do. Gasoline prices are down substantially. Or have real wage increases, which we believe that this bill will drive.
Well, that's not even touching on if we did not pass this bill, the increase on small businesses by the 199A deduction going up by almost 20%, the impact that would have on small businesses in our country.
Exactly, Congressman. And as I've said many times, and I get somehow my friends on Wall Street accuse me of being a redistributionist when I say Wall Street's done great. It's time for Main Street to do great. Wall Street can still do fine. Both can do well together, but it is Main Street's time. Main Street is driven by small business. We are working on regulations. I have probably met, including conferences, over 300 small and community bankers to try to stop this regulatory noose that is around them so that they can grow the economy.
So the One Big Beautiful Bill had strong language blocking the use of ESG metrics in federal contracting and finance. How is Treasury ensuring that woke corporate activism is no longer subsidized or promoted with taxpayer dollars?
We have taken out all language at Treasury. We are looking at it in all contracts, and we are looking for the best outcomes. I think if you were to look at the CHIPS Act, which the Democrats thought was a great success, that there were so many woke bells and whistles in that it was impossible to get the money out the door by the Commerce Department during the tenure of the Biden administration.
In the little time I have left, President Trump has made clear that U.S. trade policy must put America workers first. How is Treasury working with USTR and other agencies to ensure that financial and trade policy is aligned with the America First agenda?
We work every day on that, and we are trying to, these trade deals or this trade situation did not happen overnight. It's happened over 20 or 40 years. As I said earlier, I agree with President Trump that I'm not blaming the countries. They got away with it. It was the administration, Congress, who let them get away with it. So we are pushing back on high tariff countries, non-tariff trade barriers, which could include things like local content requirements, currency manipulation, and then, as in the case of China and many other countries, subsidies to industry and labor.
Thank you for your time today. I yield back.
Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. I want to begin by discussing a bill which I've introduced here in the House, Lindsey Graham in the Senate, the Sanctioning Russia Act. As you know, Mr. Secretary, this legislation requires sweeping sanctions on all those individuals, financial institutions, and other entities affiliated with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It establishes a 500% tariff on all imports from Russia to the United States, as well as on products from any nation which continues to enable this war through the purchase of Russian origin oil and natural gas. Mr. Secretary, this committee and this Congress have an obligation to provide the administration with the tools necessary to deliver lasting peace through strength. The Sanctioning Russia Act has strong support from many on this dais and in the House, and has 84 out of 100 U.S. senators currently signing on as co-sponsors. So my first question, Mr. Secretary, how well is the Department of Treasury ready and able to implement legislation of this scope should it become law?
Good. Thank you for this very important point. So economic tools remain an important facet of the administration's strategy to end the conflict. All the options are on the table. Treasury is ready to take action to facilitate a durable and lasting peace. We have existing U.S. sanctions and export controls on Russia that remain in place and continue to be enforced. I'm aware of the legislation. I would encourage Congress to continue to let this administration have flexibility to support the negotiations. We should be aware of unintended consequences.
Specifically, what resources does OFAC require to ensure that the sanctions are executed swiftly as intended?
We have all the resources that we need, sir.
Okay, and I want to point out, Mr. Secretary, we appreciate the administration's support of this legislation to maximize the administration's leverage to deal with Mr. Putin. Separately from sanctions, but on a related topic, can you speak to what steps the United States, and particularly the Treasury Department, Mr. Secretary, I know you had a big role to play in the mineral agreement. Thank you for that. Any steps you can share of the Treasury Department taking to implement the April 30th agreement, which establishes a joint reconstruction investment fund in support of the long-term economic success of Ukraine?
Yes, and Congressman, just as I have said with the U.S., economic security is national security is economic security. President Trump and I believe that a strong, sound Ukrainian economy over the long term will be their best defense. When the Berlin Wall came down, Poland and Ukraine economies were the same size. Now Poland's is 3 times larger. I believe that we could imagine in 2 decades that Ukrainian economy, through good management, through a partnership like this and global investment, could be larger than the Russian economy. And I think that that would provide a very prove an extreme deterrent for whomever is running Russia then. I would say this partnership, we are working on operationalizing it quickly. There's going to be, we had members of the Ukrainian economic team in our offices at Treasury last week. There's going to be a big conference in Rome about rebuilding Ukraine. We are urging the World Bank to focus on this. And Congressman, I believe that you will be in extreme agreement with me on this, that we are dedicated and confirmed the fact that no country contributed to the Russian war machine through monies, through troops, or through military parts or any parts used for Russian military weapons will be eligible to participate in the rebuilding of the Ukraine. You do not get to destroy a country, destroy people, ruin lives, and then get paid to rebuild it.
Thank you for that, sir. Just very quickly, revisiting, you said you wanted flexibility. This legislation is designed to give the administration maximum flexibility and pressure to end this conflict. It's got a ton of co-sponsors in the House, 84 out of 100 U.S. senators. Is there any changes specifically you'd like to see made to that legislation?
I'm happy to have my staff work with you on that, and it is good to see that some things can get done on a bipartisan basis.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. During this hearing, we have been hearing about the ways that the Trump administration claims it will help working people. However, the data shows that policies will do the opposite. The Trump administration wants to help the rich, not the poor. However, the Democrats on this committee are committed to helping the poor and the working class families. That is why we have protected legislation to protect affordable health care, increase the child tax credit, and make sure the rich pay their fair share. I've also introduced legislation called the Tax the Workers Act. It is important to understand that where we are today, that workers are demanding help and support. Workers should be able to keep more of their paycheck. Both younger and older workers will qualify. The Earned Income Tax Credit is one of the most effective tools to bust poverty. Congress should work on these type of measures to help needed assistance, not people who want favors from this corrupt administration. I encourage my colleagues in this administration to reconsider their approach to governance and work with us to make this country better. Stop stealing from. It's important to make sure that we make sure that people in the poor, not just the rich, that we have an opportunity here to really send a collective message. And I hope, Mr. Secretary, that we will take advantage of that. I yield back the balance of my time.
Ms. Tenney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to say thank you to the Secretary for your remarkable testimony. I don't know if I've seen better testimony in my short number of years in Congress, but I will say I've continued to be impressed, and in honor of today's baseball game, President Trump's appointment with you, he definitely hit this one out of the park. So congratulations on your great work.
I would just say it's on 3 hours sleep. So.
That's even more incredible. I know the feeling of jet lag for sure. And just wanted to talk to you about a couple things. And I'm a small business owner. I have a district that my entire northern border is Canada, and they're a very important trading partner on so many levels. And we really, I was one of the people that was here in President Trump's first term and voted for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And unlike the Democrats who are here, I come from rural upstate New York, and I will tell you as a small business owner, and our business is in its 79th year, we're still in business. And the one thing that saved us was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It was incredible to give us the small business benefits that we received, that some of them you referred to today. And I just wanted to highlight just a couple things just to touch on this issue, and I really thank Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick for meeting with us and talking about this issue with us. But we do have a number of legacy businesses in my community. They're copper fabricators, aluminum fabricators, all dependent on smelting operations coming from Canada. And some of these companies are 100 years old, 200 years old. Paul Revere built his copper business in my region, Revere Copper. It's been there for over 200 years. And they're a little concerned about the tariffs, although they wholeheartedly agree we need to bring our supply chains back. They wholeheartedly agree that our area and our Erie Canal District, which I represent most of the Erie Canal, we were hollowed out by China and unfair trade, and we want to continue to do business. And they all agree that we need to deal with reshoring and bringing our supply chains back with President Trump. And these are wonderful, patriotic legacy businesses. We want to make sure that they can be in business. Now, again, let me add one more factor. They're surviving in upstate New York. So we have some of the highest taxes, highest regulatory burden, highest minimum wage,
most expensive energy.
worst energy state, extremely, by the way, a catastrophic energy grid that we face. If it weren't for the nuclear power, all of which the nuclear reactors are in my district, and hydropower coming from Niagara Falls, another gift, we can't touch our wonderful natural gas reserves that we have in the Marcellus and Utica Shale because of New York's far left Democratic one-party rule, ridiculous, unscientific policy. But we also have, is there a way that we can find some relief for some of these businesses on the tariff side and make sure that we can bring Canada back in the mix? And is there work being done, not just on the fabrication side with copper, aluminum, steel, but also on the agricultural side? Because I also have the 5th largest dairy district in the entire country. And we have issues with the USTR and with Canada's unfair trade. So we have sort of both sides. Can you address that a little? I know President Trump really wants to help us. Where's your position on this?
So, Representative, I think that you have talked about the balancing act that rebalancing trade constitutes. Because on one hand, Canada has very discriminatory dairy tariffs on the U.S. I can't remember the number, but they're in the...
Great. We'd like to revisit that
Yes.
issue as well, the USTR. We think they're unfair. We think...
They're in the hundreds of percents.
Yes.
After a bit. We are happy, even though it's commerce and USTR, my staff is happy to discuss with you, your constituents, your staff, what we can do to make the manufacturing up there more resilient. Companies that have been around since Paul Revere are doing something right. Mm-hmm. So we want to make sure that we can help them not only survive, but thrive. And so we are happy to do that. And look, I think that the new Canadian government has made very good progress in righting some mistakes made by the previous leadership. So I think we are on a more sustainable path. I'll be traveling with President Trump to the G7 on Sunday, and I would expect that we would be meeting with Prime Minister Carney.
We really appreciate it. And then we want to see these tariffs in place, but we also want to see a balance, as you say, so that we can keep these legacy businesses and the thousands of jobs that they produce in our region. And everybody's all for reshoring, and everyone's for making sure that we make these things in America, because we can and must do that again in order to build our economy. And I just want to thank you again, and I know you're on a little bit of sleep, but we are grateful for your service and the wonderful job you're doing representing our nation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And we are dedicated to areas of the country like yours that especially experienced the China shock to rejuvenating the manufacturing base there.
Ms. Fischbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Secretary, I would like to also thank you and just tell you what an incredible job you're doing, and really appreciate that you are here, even on so little sleep, here in front of the committee. And we kind of know how you feel since we did our 18-hour stint a couple of weeks ago now. But sincerely, just thank you and thank you. And yeah. Just so you know, I represent a very rural district in western Minnesota, and I also border Canada, so I share the concerns that Ms. Tenney does. And agriculture is the major driver of our economy in my area, and small businesses, and they're the lifeblood of the economy there, but across America. And I know that Mr. Stube and Ms. Tenney both asked about small businesses and with the advantages in the tax bill and what would happen if they didn't. But if you could, not only those small businesses, if you maybe would expand on what would happen to our farming industry, what would happen to our farm communities if we didn't pass this bill, if it didn't become law?
Well, Congresswoman, as you may or may not know, I am a farmer and grew up in a rural area. And so let's talk about the positive and then the cataclysmic. The positive is that we are working very hard at Treasury to reinvigorate our community banks and small banks, that they are responsible for 70% of ag lending, 40% of real estate lending, and 30% of small business lending. So I think that's one of the best things that we can do. We are in our trade negotiations, we are constantly pushing to open other markets that have high non-tariff barriers or sometimes tariff barriers on American agricultural products and we are pushing substantial purchase agreements for American farmers. On the other side, that no one will do well if the one big beautiful bill fails. That the largest tax increase in history does not help anyone, and I am sure that farmers who are working people, our farmers occupy a special place because they are working people, but they are also small business people, and they are sophisticated. They have large equipment needs, so the immediate expensing for new equipment. I had some business people tell me earlier this week that they were waiting for the tax bill. They know that they're going to be able to get 100% expensing for the tax bill. As President Trump said in his address to Congress, it will be retroactive to January 20th, but they need 100% certainty because, as I'm sure so many of your constituents operate on razor-thin margins, that without the surety of the tax bill, without knowing they're going to get the 100% expensing, that they will not be able to buy the new equipment that will give higher yields.
Well, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I appreciate your comments on capital because that is one of the challenges, not just for the ag community, but the communities in general, is that capital expenditure. There's not as much available in rural areas, and so I appreciate your work with those smaller banks and trying to open markets. But just one other thing I wanted to ask about, the Biden administration and, the 45Z provision in the reconciliation bill, and the Biden administration failed to finalize guidance on 45Z, and it's created, serious issues and uncertainty in the biofuels industry. And, you mentioned the uncertainty, and we're feeling the uncertainty of that with the biofuel plants. And so can I get a commitment from you to expedite the process of finalizing the guidance for 45Z? And can I also ask that you would work with myself and other members of this committee to make the credit the strongest it can be for American farmers?
Yes, so I am happy to put myself in contact with yours immediately. We want to get this done quickly. What we are trying to do is to make sure that 45C is more of a North American product and that there are not overseas actors, specifically Chinese companies, that backdoor into it through Mexico.
Well,
so we will work quickly with your staff on that.
Absolutely, and I would love to be part of that process because we need to do this for our farmers, and I am over time. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schneider, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, you come to this historic committee with both the honor and the responsibility to uphold the proud legacy of your predecessors, starting with Alexander Hamilton. As Mr. Neal earlier noted, it's a fair expectation that when you come here, you don't, quote, fudge the numbers. Mr. Secretary, I'm disappointed that so much of what you have said today has stretched the truth, ignored the facts, and avoided directly answering our questions. But that really shouldn't surprise anyone, as in your relatively short tenure, Secretary, you've established quite a record of dissembling, deflecting, and too many times just simply highlighting. I'm going to highlight just a few. On June 1st, on Face the Nation, you said, thus far there have been no price increases because of the Trump tariffs. Simply not true. In fact, many companies have expressly stated they've been forced to raise prices, and others expect to do so. Public companies have noticed this in their, as required by law, reports to their investors. I ask unanimous consent to submit to the record an article published by CNBC titled, "Here are the retailers raising prices as Trump tariffs take hold."
Without objection.
Costco has said,
Congressman, I would
this is
point
my
out
time,
that
Mr. Secretary,
inflation
this is my
today was
time. Costco has said it's
0.1%.
increased prices because of tariffs for bananas, for pineapples, for flowers. Best Buy has raised prices, and those changes took effect in May. Shark Ninja has raised prices for coffee machines. Newell Brands, Graco has said it has raised prices on baby gear by 20%. I ask unanimous consent to submit the entire May issue of Musical Merchandise Review, the cover titled, "How Tariffs Are Already Impacting and Will Continue to Threaten the Music Industry," just as an example. I also had a constituent visiting this morning who manufactures here in the United States with U.S. employees using U.S.-produced aluminum, selling to U.S. consumers. He shared with me that the price of aluminum, what's known as the Midwest Premium, rose 30 cents a pound after President doubled the tariffs on aluminum. Reuters reported on June 9th that the Midwest Premium hit a record 62.5 cents per pound, and that since Mr. Trump was elected, the price has risen nearly 190%. Another example, on May 18th, you said gasoline prices have collapsed under President Trump. According to AAA, when President Trump took office in January, the average price per gallon was $3.23. Prices have gone up and down, but last month, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics said that prices were actually higher. This week, AAA has the average current price at $3.12. None of this reflects a collapse in prices. And on March 7th, you said, "There's nothing I'm going to do to hurt collections at the IRS." Yet immediately after the end of this year's tax season, an internal IRS memo indicated you intend to cut 40% of the IRS workforce. You stated that the systems at IRS are grossly outdated. Your predecessor, Charles Rettig, sat in that chair. He was appointed by President Trump, and he testified that we have a potentially $1 trillion annual tax gap. He said then, and I believe now, that better systems and more people working in compliance will help close that tax gap. And yet you are trying to stop the investments in new technology and cutting 40% of the workforce. Mr. Secretary, I frankly wonder if we and the American people should believe anything you say. But let me shift topics.
Is there a question,
Mr. Secretary,
sir?
I am sure you saw the World Bank's forecast released yesterday that economic growth in the United States this year will drop by half as a result of the president's tariff policies. It also lowered its forecast for global economic growth because of Mr. Trump's tariffs, and warned that if they increase further, the slowdown will be even more severe. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from the Wall Street Journal entitled, "World Bank Sees U.S. Growth Rate Halving as Tariffs Slow Global Economy."
Without objection, if so ordered.
So let me now turn to investment in the U.S. Mr. Secretary, the U.S. is the world's first choice for foreign direct investment, or FDI. Yes or no, is it good that foreign companies and foreign investors want to invest in the U.S.?
Always.
FDI has grown every year since at least 2018. Mr. Secretary, is it good or bad to see that FDI grow in U.S. economy?
Good.
More than 8 million American workers work for companies with foreign ownership. Mr. Secretary, isn't part of what President Trump and you are trying to do is provide incentives for foreign companies to bring jobs back to the U.S.?
We're providing all companies bring jobs back to the U.S.
Great. So now let's discuss Section 899, which my Republican colleagues passed in this House. It's a new set of taxes applying punitive taxes on investors, on individuals, and on companies that are domiciled in countries that levy unfair foreign taxes. They include many of our allies, members of the European Union, the UK, Australia, Canada, and others. Major investors and employers agree that if this revenge tax is implemented, employers will pull back on investment in their operations in the U.S. Indeed, the Joint Committee on Taxation's revenue estimate confirms this. Later in the budget window, the provision begins to lose revenue. Mr. Secretary, this runs counter to yours and the President's stated goal of driving investment in the U.S. We should be welcoming foreign direct investment, trying to give incentives for it to come here, not creating
Congressman,
barriers.
we should not welcome foreign countries taking U.S. companies' tax revenue for their own treasuries.
But you are punishing the companies and the individuals who want to invest in the United States, lowering investment in the United States, hurting American jobs, hurting American innovation, hurting the future for American workers.
That is a
I yield back.
mischaracterization.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Maury, recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary Bessent, thank you for being here. Thank you for also clarifying some of the perils of Pillar 2. This is a tough discussion. to be able to push back on what Pillar 2 could ultimately do, where we are losing so much revenue to foreign countries. That's the exact opposite of what took place in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where companies through the foreign-derived intangible income was actually encouraged to invest back in the U.S. And we haven't seen the type of inversions that took place during many of the Obama years prior to 2017. Companies are repatriating their revenue and they're repatriating their support back into the U.S., and we're going to continue to do that. Sir, again, thank you for being here. There's no question that there are billions of dollars worth of waste within the federal government, and I applaud the work that the department is doing to address, in particular, improper payments and improve verification before payments go out. Those are sensible, very bipartisan opportunities that we can address here, and thank you for putting a lot of focus on that. I represent Ogden, Utah, and the 7,000 IRS employees that work in and call Utah home. In talking to my constituents, many of whom are federal employees with decades of experience, I found that they want to be part of improving efficiency at the IRS. They know their jobs better than any of us, and I'm concerned that the on-the-job experience is not being utilized to its potential. Very simple. Sir, we've had some amazing opportunities to interact, and I've appreciated all of that with you and your team. Can we continue? Can we sit down with you and your team and discuss the specifics of the Ogden facility and how I and the Utahns I represent can participate in increasing efficiency at the IRS?
Congressman Moore, I appreciate our past interactions, and my staff and I would be happy to do that. And what I will tell you is that we are aiming for a culture change at the IRS. We have empowered, we are cutting waste. There is a 35-year-old, maybe close to your age.
I wish.
The tech update where we are spending $3.5 billion per year, which is 10 times more than a private sector bank would spend for the equivalent payments. And what we are finding is that the hardworking people, as you described in Ogden, are feeling empowered, and that's what we want them to do. We want them to provide the solutions, not for the solutions to be provided from up high.
I've walked through the systems with them, taken tours and stuff. They're excited about the particular technological improvements that we can make, and your investment and your focus on that is much appreciated. So, okay, with my remaining few minutes, let's try to correct some of the fallacies we've been hearing about the One Big Beautiful Bill and its effect, in particular, on national debt, something that I'm very passionate about. Correct me if I'm wrong on any of these statistics. Since World War II, the average annual real GDP growth rate sits at approximately 3.15%. In the last 10 years, even with COVID, the average is still at approximately 2.5%.
Yes, sir.
Those are the facts that I have here. The bill that the House Republicans passed assumes a 2.6% growth rate, and that would generate $2.6 trillion over the next 10 years. With the spending cuts, historic spending cuts that we've done, ranging in about 1.6 cuts and other offsets, that assumed growth rate is enough to offset the tax cuts provided to the middle class through this bill. In fact, it will actually reduce the deficit by an assumed $184 billion. Some quick yes or no's on those numbers. Do you think that with President Trump's deregulatory policies coupled with the tax policies of the One Big Beautiful Bill, that this 2.6% growth rate is possible to achieve?
I think it is possible, and we achieved it under President Trump's first term, and I think we could easily see it over the 10-year window at an average.
And do you think it's possible that we could actually exceed a conservative 2.6% rate?
Yes, sir. I believe that given this gigantic AI spend that we're seeing, that the productivity increases from that may hit the U.S. economy within the next 12 to 24 months and could accelerate our GDP growth.
Accelerated GDP growth, and do you think that my colleagues from the minority party are correct when they say that the bill will add trillions of dollars to the national debt?
I believe that they are mistaken.
Just to close here, it is not unfair for my colleagues on the Democrat side to use CBO scoring in any type of criticism. I did it with the CBO scoring of the American Rescue Plan. I just wish we could keep the argument to where it should be. We are assuming what I believe is a reasonable 2.6% growth rate. The CBO's taking a lower percent. That's great. I think they're wrong in this case. And I think they always undervalue the potential that we have and the reality that we have from this type of economic growth policies. We have not seen revenues tank or dip since 2017 when we enacted these. We have an opportunity here to create a strong GDP, and that is the most important factor to being able to go and get after our debt to GDP ratio. Sir, thank you so much for the clarifications, and I yield back.
Ms. Van Dyne, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If my colleague Linda Sanchez is true as it implies that women are constantly interrupted, you must be having a gender identity crisis today, because you have not been allowed to finish a single sentence from my Democrat colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I want to allow you to have an opportunity to speak because you've got a lot to say. I mean, over the last 4 years, we've seen working families and small businesses have been sidelined, while green corporate welfare has soared and the IRS has turned into a political weapon, targeting audits instead of actually offering assistance. But now, thanks to President Trump's decisive leadership and your work at the Treasury, we're finally seeing a course correction. This committee's Republicans have been proud to partner with the administration and with your office on the One Big Beautiful Bill. Legislation that delivers exactly what Americans have demanded: permanent tax relief, higher wages, stronger supply chains, and a laser focus on working families. And this bill ends tax on tips and overtime, slashes wasteful green energy giveaways to China, and it puts America, not global climate conferences, at the center of our economic policy. And unlike the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which sent billions overseas and destabilized our energy grid, this is about made in America investments and letting working people keep more of what they earn. We're also seeing tariffs properly applied, bringing adversaries to the table, reopening trade talks, and resetting unfair terms that have hurt U.S. workers for decades. That's leverage. That's leadership. And finally, let's talk about the IRS. Under your leadership, we have seen billions in waste cut in one of the most efficient filing seasons in recent memory. You've shifted the agency from policing to public service, where it belongs. And the One Big Beautiful Bill builds on this by cracking down on fraud, requiring Social Security numbers for tax credits, and putting taxpayers first, not last. I know that you have not been able to answer a lot of questions today that were brought up. One of them has been specifically about the cuts that you've made at the IRS. Can you please explain the cuts that have been made and how that has added efficiencies?
So I would categorize the cuts in two areas. And to be clear, some of them were not cuts. Some of them were voluntary retirements, people who wanted to move on. But a large portion, the IRA bill swelled the ranks of the collection agents, and because the Democrats did that, because it gave them a good score. That the CBO said, if you hire more bodies, then there should be more collections. Data, I believe, has shown that that is not true. It would be like saying, oh, if we draft Scott Bessent and we have him play against LeBron James, he will do fine. That these new auditors are not equipped to audit sophisticated taxpayers. They would undoubtedly be unleashed against working Americans. We saw from a whistleblower in the Atlanta IRS that qualifications were lowered to bring in these new agents. So we have just gone back to—
So we were filling bodies. We weren't actually filling the places with workers.
And so we've just gone back to the 2020 level, and the IRS collected taxes very well for hundreds of years before that. Secondly, the tech upgrade has been a disaster. It began in 1990. It is still ongoing. We have taken a look at that, and we were able to save what we believe will be $2 billion a year on that, and end up with a better system.
And that's great. We actually have some bills that we've introduced here that we're hoping to be able to supply help on the tech side.
Yeah, and that 35-year upgrade will be finished by the end of President Trump's term, and I think it will align with my policies of collection, privacy, customer service.
Excellent. I want to give you a chance to answer the last question about the foreign direct investment. You weren't able to. Can you please go ahead and finish your answer?
Well, the other thing I want to answer is the congressman conveniently truncated the World Bank article because it said that President Trump's policies were going to cause a decline in world growth, but World Bank president endorsed President Trump's policies. He said that he was doing the right thing for America and that many trade frictions had been created. So if we were going to be honest, the whole article from the Wall Street Journal should go into the record, not just that.
All right. Thank you very much, and I yield.
Thank you.
Mr. Panetta, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary, good to see you. Thank you for being here. As you said, as we know, you came directly from negotiations with China on trade issues, and that a framework was actually released today. And I do appreciate your willingness, the administration's willingness, to seek these types of deals. However, I got to tell you, I'm really, really concerned about the sustainability of any agreement given the lack of congressional involvement and the use of this administration's tariffs under IEEPA. Now, unlike trade agreements, not frameworks, agreements that pass through Congress, these executive frameworks don't include dispute mechanisms, including independent arbiters to rule on disputes. And I think you believe, and I believe, I would say, that makes enforcement extremely difficult. And trade agreements, I firmly believe, need to be enforceable. Secretary, did the last administration, when it had an agreement with China, the China Phase 1 deal, did they come to Congress for a vote?
The Biden administration?
No, I apologize. The last Trump administration. Thank you.
No.
Okay. And what happened was that China failed to meet all of its obligations under that Phase 1 agreement. And although it committed to increasing its imports from the U.S. by $200 billion from 20 to 21, it only followed through with 58% of its promised purchases. Now, under Trump's China Phase 1 agreement, did companies have access to any neutral dispute resolution process or panel when those obligations were not met?
I would have to, I'm not USTR, so I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
I would always,
Thank you.
I would also say the Biden administration failed to
No,
enforce.
I'm reclaiming my time, as I got to do. It didn't, okay? So this administration has tried these types of agreements before, and it led to unenforceable agreements. Now look, learn from Biden, learn from Trump. I get it, I'm with you. Frameworks, when it comes to trade, as I say, and my colleagues have heard me say, is like a hamburger without the meat. Okay, you need agreements. You need Congress involved. And that's what I'd ask, that you please change track towards these more sustainable, comprehensive free trade agreements. And please, get us involved. Use Congress. Help us use our authority. And I know we need to do more of that as well. Trust me. Secretary, the national debt is $36 trillion, correct?
Approximately, yes.
$29 trillion of that debt is held by the public, correct?
Approximately, yes.
And I think that number is relevant, is relevant for assessing the debt, as the rest of the debt is in intergovernmental holdings or money the government owes itself. And I believe it's more helpful to look at the debt held by the public as a share of the U.S. economy. At the beginning of this year, the ratio stood at nearly 97% of the GDP. I mean, that's not far off its peak of 106% of GDP after World War II. However, at that time, debt to GDP was on a downward trajectory. Now, from the end of World War II up until about 2008, the debt averaged only 40% of GDP, which was pretty manageable. But since 2008, that debt has jumped from 40 to 100% of GDP. And with this reconciliation bill that you're supporting, combined with other costs, such as Social Security and Medicare, we are heading to a 250 to 300% of GDP debt within 30 years. That is a point that would cause economic calamity. Now, it's no wonder that Moody's downgraded the U.S. credit score, citing the large annual fiscal deficits and growing interest cost. The budget deficit shows how quickly the problem is getting worse as well. The deficit was $1.8 trillion last fiscal year, but this reconciliation bill is set to increase that to over $4 trillion by the end of the decade, and it could send interest costs higher than $2 trillion by 2034. This would consume nearly 1/3 of all government revenue. The CBO said the reconciliation bill would increase the deficit by $3 trillion. A reasonable federal budget committee estimates $5 trillion. Penn Wharton estimates $5.8 trillion. I get the warnings of rising debt and rising debt eventually causing an economic calamity, but it's already hurting the economy now. as we're seeing higher interest rates, higher mortgage rates, and we very well may see elevated inflation and a drag on economic growth. Now, under the current debt trends, real income growth is projected to slow by 10% in the next 30 years. But if the debt rapidly rises, income growth could decline by 30%. Secretary, in your confirmation testimony, you stated that we must get our fiscal house in order. And you've talked about the national debt as a security problem in the past. Is this still your view?
Congressman, could I ask where those numbers came from?
I will get that to you, but I have those in my preparation.
Okay,
I'd be happy to get those to you.
because-
Once again, I hope it is still your view. I'm out of time, but I really hope it is still your view. And I hope that you not only support trade deals that deal with Congress, I hope that you support a bipartisan fiscal commission where Democrats and Republicans can actually come together, sit at the table, and actually work together on reducing our debt and deficit. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
You know what, Mr. Secretary, I'm going to give you some opportunity to answer the question.
Which question?
Yeah, well,
I still...
I know you're wondering where the figures came from. You need to know where the figures came from.
As I've said before, when I look in the mirror in the morning, I see a deficit hawk, and I support everything to consolidate this debt, stabilize the debt to GDP, and bring down that ratio in a controlled manner. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to fix it overnight. I would like to fix it by the end of President Trump's term.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Feenstra, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Secretary Bessent, thank you for being in front of us today, Ways and Means. I consider myself a novice in economics. I love to read it and work through it, even teach it once in a while. And I appreciate all that you've done under this administration. I live in rural Iowa. You live, I think, in rural South Carolina, and we love our areas that we live in. And for me, President Trump won rural America by about 90%. There's an ultimatum, the way I see it, an ultimatum on what we need to change in government to make America great again. And I'd like to talk about that as we look forward and as you're in your role, and we have this big, beautiful bill that's coming out. Can you talk a little bit about, for Iowa or South Carolina, how this bill will grow our states economically? And I think about, immediate expensing, things like this. Can you just tell the public saying, all right, this is how this is going to be economics on steroids?
With pleasure. So, and I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I would go back to the small and community banks, because as I said, small and community banks finance 70% of ag loans, so we are working to stabilize and unshackle them. The tax bill, farm structures would count for immediate expensing in the tax bill, as would any farm equipment that would increase the efficiencies.
179 depreciation, you name it.
And as you know, most farms are set up as pass-through corporations. Right. And again, these people, I think, do not consider themselves rich. They are not the ones being stereotyped and lampooned by the other side of the aisle here. These are hardworking people who, they do manual labor, they keep their books, they buy equipment, they make business decisions, and I think that the certainty and the permanence here is going to be very, very important.
It's invaluable.
To know that it is going to be there. And as I said, many business owners with whom I've spoken are holding back on the expenditures. Right. And I'm glad you mentioned 90% of the farmers who supported President Trump. I actually, within the past 48 hours with my Chinese counterpart, I told the Vice Premier that you did not make good on your ag purchases, right. And President Trump's #1 constituency, they are our farmers, and we expect that will be made good.
Thank you, Secretary Bessent. Thank you. I mean that. I mean, our commodity prices, soybeans and corns, we rely on these export markets. And if Brazil and Argentina takes over these markets, we're in deep trouble. So I'm very grateful for that. And just talking about tariffs a little bit, we've been taken advantage of for decades. So now as we move forward, we're trying to create a level playing field. And you talked about certainty. Can you just extrapolate on that just a little bit so for small business or large manufacturers or whatever, they just want certainty. How does this project out over the next 6 to 12 months?
So I think, as I've said many times, this administration's economic program is a three-legged stool: trade, tax, and deregulation. Yep. The trade has moved faster because the president has used IEPA, an emergency power. Tax, I congratulate everyone in the Republican side of moving the one big beautiful bill through the House with Speaker Johnson's leadership. And we are working with your Senate colleagues. Senator Thune has given the date of July 4th. We'll see. And then deregulation, I think, is both the regulation of the Biden administration acted as a tax, and it acted as an expense on the American people per household, and it slowed economic growth.
Yes.
And I believe that as these regulations come off, whether it is permitting, whether for ag, whether it is water usage, whether it is the environmental, that those will kick in the third, fourth quarter, and by 2026 will really take off. So I think on trade, we want to move quickly, but these are big issues, and we want to do it right. Yep. And as I said, there are 18 important trading partners. We will get those, and I think we can have certainty there, but the real certainty we need is this tax bill.
Yep. Thank you, Secretary Bessent, and thank you and Trump for all you do. This is incredible, and we're going to have a great economic future as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Malliotakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. Under the previous Biden administration, we had 0 trade deals. And in just 5 months, we're seeing more cooperation from Mexico and Canada as it relates to the border and fentanyl. UK, you have a trade deal there. China, we have a framework. Congratulations on the success in last night's meeting. India, Japan, they are now at the table, as are dozens of other countries. And I think it's really important as we approach that July 9th date there for lifting the hold or the pause on the tariffs, that we take into account that we do have these partners who are working with us in good faith. And I hope and I urge the administration to not reinstate the tariffs for the nations that are at the table, that are working with us to reduce the tariffs, the trade deficits, and increase our market access for our products. And I would just like to get your opinion on that, if you agree that we should have a more targeted approach. Let's focus on the most egregious offenders who are not as willing to work with us to rectify that.
Well, we are focusing on the most egregious. And as I've said, there are 18 important trading partners. Most of them account for approximately north of 90% of the trade deficit. So our largest trading partners are, many of them, the biggest problem. Many of them have, as I've said, have come with good offers and are working in good faith. It will be up to President Trump, but it is my belief that if someone is negotiating in good faith, that an extension will be possible.
That's great news.
And in conversations with USTR Ambassador Greer, it's my belief that with smaller countries where we have lower levels of trade, we may be able to do a one-size-fits-all regional deal. So that would cover a great deal of ground on
It's great, and I wish
dozens
you a lot of success there, and I appreciate that. And if I also want to keep in mind that if we want to build in America, as the President, as you, as I, and this committee wants to do, we need to make sure that we have access to parts and supplies from abroad. So let's keep that in mind as well as we're moving forward with the tariff discussions. I'm concerned about tariffs on pharmaceuticals. In particular, it's an access issue, it's an affordability issue, it's a national security issue. As you know, right now we're relying heavily on foreign countries, particularly communist China, but domestic pharmaceutical production requires long-term investment, and to establish a secure and self-reliant supply chain here at home, it's something that you can't just flip the switch on. It does take time, and certainly what the provisions you mentioned earlier that we put in our one big beautiful bill will help us get there, incentivize, expand facilities, build new facilities. But until we reach that full domestic production capability, the U.S. remains dangerously dependent on foreign sources for life-saving medicines and medical inputs. And so I hope that we'll take that into account when we look at tariffs and not place tariffs on pharmaceuticals that we desperately need here in the United States. I, alongside with my colleague, Congressman Schneider, we introduced bipartisan legislation, H.R. 2213, the Medical Supply Chain Resiliency Act. And we learned from COVID that we must, obviously, that our supply chain is too fragile, and we need to do what we can to make it more accessible, these pharmaceuticals. My legislation would address this by enhancing the President's ability to negotiate trade agreements with trusted trade partners to reduce or eliminate tariffs, quotas, and other barriers that create a disincentive to manufacturing here in the United States. It would ensure that critical medical goods and supplies and services are delivered safely, quickly, efficiently to patients here at home. And I hope that you will take a look at this bill. It has some good bipartisan support, good industry support, and it really does complement what we did in the one big beautiful bill to incentivize and give the President that flexibility to negotiate with those trading partners.
Yeah, Congresswoman, I could not agree with you more. The only good outcome from COVID was it showed us our strategic deficiencies in areas like semiconductors and especially pharma. As you mentioned, a large part of our pharma does come from the PRC. That actually gives them negotiating leverage. I think it would be a tragic mistake if they were ever to flip off that switch, but it's always there. They could. They flipped off other switches. India, who is a more reliable, durable partner, is also a large supplier, but we do need to bring that home.
Well, great. I look forward to working with you on that, and an endorsement from you of my legislation would be very welcome.
Good. Thank you for your leadership on that.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Horsford.
Thank you, Chairman Smith, and to the ranking member. Mr. Secretary, good afternoon. Does taking health care away from 16 million Americans lower prices for working families, yes or no?
I'm not sure what that question means.
The bill, the big, beautiful bill that was passed by this committee and the majority of the Republicans in the House would eliminate health care for 16 million Americans. I'm asking, does that lower the cost for working families? Yes or no?
Again, which cost? Oil, fuel cost, food cost?
Household cost.
Sorry?
The cost that households have to cover every month. Middle class working people.
Again, I disagree with the characterization.
So the answer is no. The bill doesn't deal with that.
Well,
can you
that's your
name
answer.
one rural community whose hospital will be strengthened by this one big beautiful bill? Just one. Yes or no?
Again, I'm not HHS, but I will be happy to get to you on that.
I would appreciate that answer. 16 million people stand to lose health care. That's thousands of hospitals that will be affected. We're talking about jobs and families that will be impacted. Worse, we're dealing with these tariffs, which are taxes that Americans pay, which are raising the cost on medical equipment, putting further strain on rural hospitals in my district, but yet the billionaires under this plan will still get their tax break. Mr. Secretary, under the bill, who gets the most benefits? A billionaire with a complex tax return or a working parent with one W-2?
Under President Trump's first term, a greater...
Not the first term.
Well,
I'm asking under this bill.
Including this bill, in terms of percent, as opposed to absolute numbers, in terms of percent, working families will have a greater...
Well, in fact, Mr. Secretary, every credible outside estimator says that the wealthiest win under this proposal and working people and the poor lose. They pay more. Working people pay more. That's the story of this big, beautiful bill. Help the ultra-rich and leave everyone else paying the price. Are you yourself a beneficiary of any provision in this bill? Will you personally receive a tax cut under the provisions of under this bill?
Two things, Congressman.
Yes or no? It's a
we
simple.
had a referendum on November 5th, and
Mr.
working
Secretary,
Americans
yes or
voted
no?
for President
Reclaiming
Trump.
my time.
And
Reclaiming my time, Mr. Chairman.
Two,
Mr. Chairman, I'm reclaiming my time.
And two.
So, Mr.
I-
Secretary,
I-
it's
I-
my time, Mr. Secretary. I'm
Well,
asking you a yes or no
and
question.
I'm trying to answer you, and
It's a yes or no question.
Saying it louder does not elicit an answer.
Well, not answering the question at all proves that you're evasive. Are you the head, the person that's the head of overseeing the implementation of our tax code, a beneficiary under the provisions of, any provisions of this bill?
Again, this is an extension of an existing bill.
So are you a beneficiary?
This is an extension.
Okay,
that-
I will
if you want to
take that as a
if you
no.
want to
Mr.
rephrase
Secretary,
the question,
did the TCJA help increase the supply of housing? Yes or no?
sorry,
Did the TCJA help increase the supply of housing? Yes or no?
I don't know. And
According to the
I'm not sure that's
according
one
to
of
the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, comparing the pre and post TCJA housing market, they found that between January of 2015 to October of 2019, housing construction in fact slowed under TCJA. So, Mr. Secretary, do tariffs on steel, aluminum, and lumber raise the cost of construction? Yes or no?
Again, on the housing point, the interest rates went up because the economy was stronger.
And under this proposal,
inflation was nascent.
and under a budget report that just came out from the Yale Budget Lab, they just released data showing that because of the debt that is going to be added by this big ugly bill, mortgage rates will increase. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware that
This bill is a
I'm aware that the
disaster
Inflation
for the
Reduction
people
Act,
of Nevada
which I would guess you
who are
voted for.
struggling with the cost of rent and the ability to afford housing. These are the pressing issues that my constituents are concerned about, and I hope that this administration understands the impact of the negative consequences of their proposal.
This administration very
I
much
yield-
understands
I yield back.
the impacts on working Americans, and that's why working Americans voted for President Trump.
Mr. Kerry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Secretary. Number one, I just want to be clear, and I already know the answer to this, but it's a yes or no. Are you making more money today than you were when you were in the private sector?
Less.
No, I know that.
And just to be clear, too,
Yeah.
in 2017, when TCJA was enacted, my tax rate went up.
Yeah.
Went up.
Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that. I do appreciate you being here. I do want to.
Will the gentleman yield for 1 second?
No, a gentleman will not yield, not at all. But what I would like to say is that I represent Central Ohio, including Columbus, Ohio, which is the second fastest growing city in the country. And while it is great, it presents a lot of issues as it relates to affordable housing. And I know that we've covered that here on the Ways and Means Committee. According to a report commissioned by the Building Industry Association of Central Ohio, housing permitting must increase approximately twofold in recent trends to meet the projected housing need of over 100,000 new housing units in just the next decade. So obviously increasing affordable housing is something that's very important to Central Ohio and all across the 15th Congressional District, and it's been a top priority of mine in Congress. The bill that we have put forward, well, there were some things that I disagreed with. The bill that we did expand affordable housing supply by restoring the 12.5% allocation increase for LIHTC, while lowering the bond financing threshold to 25%. I think these are very, very powerful things in the affordable housing world, and something that I think we, as members of Congress, on both sides, I mean, you're going to hear a lot of drama, but the bottom line is I think there are a lot of things that we can agree with.
do want to ask you a couple questions before we move on to the next person. Over the last 4 years, in a state like Ohio, families have been squeezed, obviously, by rising prices, cost of living, groceries, whatever. And I want to address the child tax credit, because I think this is something that we did in our package that I'm very proud to have supported. So I supported it in this bill, and it increases it by $500. Can you speak to how the Treasury views the role of modernizing the child tax credit and boosting family stability and workforce participation, and what's at stake if we let these enhanced benefits expire?
Well, Congressman Kerry, that is a fantastic point, because not only does the One Big Beautiful Bill add $500 to the child tax credit, it makes it permanent. So if the bill does not pass, then there will be substantial diminution when we talk about uncertainty for working families in terms of which parent should go to work, which shouldn't, in terms of supplies, in terms of their household balance sheets. So I think, as with most things in this bill, the permanence, as well as the increase in the child tax credit, is what is very powerful here.
And again, can you address if we did nothing, right? If we did absolutely nothing, we're going to go up to $2,500. But if we did nothing, what does the child tax credit go back to?
I don't know the exact number.
It's $1,000, right?
Yeah, so it's $1,000. So
right. So I mean,
it's half.
We're giving more money, but if we do nothing, it would go back to $1,000. I think I'm correct with that.
Yep, and the $2,500 is permanent.
Yeah.
There is surety there for families planning their budgets, planning the labor allocation, how they will work, when they will work.
Mr. Secretary, I do appreciate your time, and I want to let you know, I mean, as somebody that's on this committee, there are a lot of things that my colleagues on the other side and I agree with, and I just want you to know that I know that we will work continually hard to work with the administration to make sure that those things get through, because it's for the betterment of the American people. So, Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time, and I appreciate your service, sir.
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Yocum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing today, and Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. I want to applaud your work on rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. You've seen a lot of hysteria and dire predictions about DOGE, but a recent briefing by Treasury and DOGE to our staff showed there's plenty of unsexy work that happened behind the scenes. There's one example where the IRS had over 100 licenses for a piece of software where it turned out they only needed 2. There's a saying that character is what you're doing when no one's looking. The same applies to government spending. I appreciate your work in going line by line within your budget to find unnecessary spending and things like this that we can root out. One area of spending that I do think is well worth the investment is our taxpayer advocate service, which helps our caseworkers navigate the IRS bureaucracy that our constituents often face. Mr. Secretary, countries across the world are implementing taxes that target American companies. Canada's digital services tax, for example, is estimated to bring in $2.5 billion of revenue for Canada. $2.3 billion of that is from American companies. The UK, EU, and others are contemplating digital services taxes and undertaxed profit rule measures that target American companies, which basically pulls money straight out of the U.S. Treasury. Our One Big Beautiful Bill gives the Treasury Department updated tools that will fight these unfair taxes. Obviously, the best way for companies or countries to avoid these tools and these taxes is to not have unfair taxes in the first place. Are you in conversation with any countries about their DSTs and UTPRs, and what is the status of those conversations?
Yes, and to be clear, we do not use 899 as a negotiating thing, but other countries do pull substantial revenues out of the U.S. Treasury, and our great internet companies, which are unique to the U.S. They are an example. This digital service tax was especially egregious. Look, Canada is a close ally, but like, say, one's neighbor on a block, sometimes your neighbor can take things for granted, and they have put in a digital service tax, and they are taking taxes retroactively.
And Mr. Secretary, how hard is the administration fighting and pushing back?
It is a centerpiece of our tariff negotiations. So when I talk about what are we pushing back on, we are pushing back on tariffs, non-tariff measures, currency manipulation, government subsidies, and unfair taxation and the fines such as the EU does on the same companies.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And to follow up on one of my colleagues' questions, has China threatened to cut off our pharmaceuticals?
No.
Thank you. Speaking of China, China has plowed nearly $2 trillion over the last 4 years into increasing factory production and construction. But those factories aren't just churning out gizmos and gadgets for domestic consumption. It's doubling down on their overcapacity, and the numbers bear that out. Exports from China rose 13% in 2023 and 17% in 2024. It seems like there's a global recognition of the threat posed by Chinese overcapacity. The EU, Brazil, Indonesia, Thailand, and others have also imposed tariffs on China to counter the flood of cheap imports, not just us. You've talked in the past about a, quote, fortress North America, which we would coordinate with Canada and Mexico on Chinese overcapacity. Can you please give an update on administration efforts around this?
Sure. So China accounts for approximately 30% of global manufacturing. They're trying to go on their way to 40. That is unsustainable. I warned our allies that when we put our tariff wall around China, that the goods and services, which I would say are the equivalent of that Disney movie where the brooms carry the buckets of water, that's the Chinese business model. And I warned them the goods will come ashore in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, and unfortunately I was proven correct. So they are seeing substantial price deflation from China, especially in things like EVs. So we think that it's important not to have transshipment. So goods cannot move from China to Vietnam to the U.S., from China. And the reason I talked about Fortress North America, because the greatest opportunity for transshipment is via Mexico or Canada using USMCA. Our trade partners are very responsive to this. They have made some very good offers on it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Gomez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, how are you doing?
So far, so good.
Okay, I was just curious because I know Elon Musk body checked you at the White House. I just no animosity to Elon Musk, right?
You know that?
That's what I heard.
So you believe
That's what I heard.
You believe what you read on Breitbart is
well,
what
listen,
you're telling us, Congressman.
I didn't know if it's too sensitive for you. I won't ask that question, but let me move on.
I will take South Carolina over South Africa any day.
Mr. Secretary, you believe that people should be judged on their merit, correct?
Yes, sir.
You believe people should be judged on their job performance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just want to make sure. And the reason why is that one of the first things this administration promises to do was to lower taxes, lower the cost of living on day one. So let's get into that. On June 1st, Mr. Secretary, you said in regards to tariffs that there have been no significant price increases and concerns are overstated. Listen, I get it. For somebody that's worth $521 million, listen, no significant tariffs are not going to impact you. But I want to talk about working class people, people in my district and across the country that are impacted by tariffs. Do you know what percentage of shoes are actually that are sold in the United States are made here?
I do not know that, but what I know is...
Let me reclaim my time. And the reason why...
The inflation number
Let me tell you why. Because 1% of the shoes sold in the United States are made here. 1%. That means 99% of the shoes are made somewhere else. As a dad of a toddler who's growing and growing and growing, we have to buy them a lot of shoes. So that's what we know, that the prices are increasing on shoes. We also know that under the most favorite nation tariff rate, that amount is about 20%. Then you add an additional 10% across the board that you guys have placed, we're gonna see people, working people, paying more for shoes, paying more for their clothes, paying more for essentials, and it's gonna go up. And I get it. You're worth $521 million. I know that the president's a billionaire. I know Elon Musk, most of the cabinet members are billionaires. And I know that you're on the lower end of that economic ladder in the White House. But for somebody that's making $30,000 or less a year, it's significant. I worked minimum wage jobs growing up. My parents worked 4 to 5 jobs a week to make ends meet. That's most people in this country. And one of the things that we know is this big billionaire bill is going to increase taxes on working class people. We know that most of the benefits go to the higher income folks. People that are making less than $30,000 a year, according to the Joint Committee on Taxation, will be paying an additional $20 billion over 10 years. $20 billion. $20 billion over 10 years. Just want to make sure that that is clear. And if we can avoid doing that, would you support an amendment to the bill that ensures people making under $30,000 don't see any tax increase?
Congressman, I started my first job when I was 9. I found my first W-2, which was $37 a week. And I will point out that today's inflation number was 0.1%. 0.1. The lowest
let me
inflation number
reclaim my time. So that's a simple answer, simple question. Will you support an amendment that makes sure that people making $30,000 a year don't pay more?
I will support working Americans.
Let me go on, because I know you're not really answering that question. Let's go on to your 333 plan. Your 333 plan, which you doubled down on it today. 3% growth, 3% deficit to GDP, 3% million barrels of oil of domestic oil produced a year. Okay, earlier this hearing, you doubled down on those targets. And we agreed earlier in the, when I first asked you, merit, based on job performance. So will you resign if the targets aren't reached?
Those were all for the end of President Trump's administration.
Well, you said
I plan on leaving then.
Okay, well, how about we make a little wager, $50? You know, I'll be around. Would you make? Will you make a wager? Come on.
If it can go to charity. If it can go to charity,
okay,
with pleasure.
Let's make a wager, $50.
To charity.
To charity.
Okay.
And here's the why, because most economists don't think that you're going to hit those targets. CBO actually thinks this budget bill is going to grow the deficit to 7% of GDP. If you might not be willing to put your job on the line because you'll be gone by the time that the mess actually explodes. I get it. I mean, Schweikert on this committee didn't even want to vote on this damn bill because he's a deficit hawk. So the American people need a little bit clearer answers. They are struggling. They're trying to make ends meet. Rent is going up. Food costs are going up, everything's going up, and the bill, the big billionaire bill, because it benefits mainly billionaires at the expense of working people, you're cutting their health care, you're making sure that they're going to be paying more than $20 billion over the next 10 years if you're making $30,000 or less, and you guys don't care. And I think you don't care because your net worth is $521 million.
Okay, your time has expired.
That would be a false assumption.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
That would be a false assumption. And I think the people who didn't care were the Biden administration, who wiped out working families and lost in a massive referendum on November 5th.
I would like to remind the committee that this is the Ways and Means Committee, and have discussions on policies, not personalities. And don't call another member out by their name. If you're referring to another member, you say what state they're from. That is the rules of this committee. Thank you. Mr. Miller.
Wow. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Congressman.
You as well. I got to tell you, if I had to hang my hat in credibility on the Congressional Budget Office, man, I would be pretty embarrassed. Let's go through that just a little bit, and I'll dive into my remarks here. The Congressional Budget Office is as credible as the Central Broadcasting Organization, which went bankrupt. Last time they did an assessment on the 2017 TCJA, they were off by, gosh, what was it? The number was so small. It was around $1.2 trillion that the CBO is off. I'll let that speak for itself. Thank you for being here, Mr. Secretary.
And Congressman, I would point out that they were wrong. The IRA cost thus far has been more than 3x their projection.
Oh, as I said it, Mr. Secretary.
Well, the green subsidies in the IRA.
If I had to hang my hat and my credibility on the CBO, I would be embarrassed, and that is all we're hearing. So let me get into the remarks, and thank you for being here. Over the past few years, we've seen the rapid rise of digital assets across the financial landscape. More and more Americans, from everyday investors to institutional asset managers, are engaging with these technologies, and not just for speculation, but as a part of broader shift toward more accessible, decentralized financial tools. And it's not just individuals. Increasingly, United States businesses are integrating cryptocurrencies into their corporate strategies. This trend is unfolding across industries, but it's not without risk, as we know. Without clear accounting and tax guidance, these decisions introduce new layers of market exposure, not just for shareholders, but for the financial system as a whole. It has never been more evident we need clarity and parity within the tax code. The first question I have, Mr. Secretary, experts estimate that enacting a clear federal stablecoin framework could unlock up to $2 trillion in new demand for U.S. Treasuries, largely from institutional and global buyers seeking high-quality collateral. How do you view the potential benefits of stablecoin legislation in strengthening domestic demand for Treasuries and supporting broader access to credit products such as mortgages that Americans rely on?
Congressman Miller, that is a fantastic question. And I have been in touch, a lot of discussions with your colleagues in the Senate from London over the weekend as they push through their stablecoin legislation, urging them to get it to a vote as quickly as possible, because I believe that U.S. dollar-backed stablecoins, as you said, collateralized with Treasury bills, could be a substantial portion, or create a substantial new buyer for U.S. Treasury bills. And I think equally as important, it can lock in dollar dominance. Over history, there's been a series of events that have kept the U.S. as a reserve currency, and I think passing this important stablecoin legislation could be that event for the 2020s.
I could not agree more with you. That's why I'm excited to see the push for it. Would you agree, Mr. Secretary, that pairing that type of stablecoin legislation with clear, modernized tax guidance for digital assets would offer the greatest chance of encouraging responsible investment, giving both individuals and institutions the confidence and certainty they would need?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I feel as well. I want to shift to our one big beautiful bill, Mr. Secretary. As we look toward the expiration of key provisions of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, I'd appreciate your thoughts on how extending the expanded standard deduction would improve middle-class families and how Treasury is evaluating the trade-offs associated with that policy.
Well, we've seen the numbers, and the largest tax increase in history would add the great distress to working families due to the economic distress and to many of the provisions, as we just discussed, the child tax credit dropping from $2,000 to $1,000. And I don't even like to think about the havoc that it would wreak within the economy, especially within small businesses.
And, we hear a lot about, how this is only, a tax cut for a certain, demographic or socioeconomic class within our society. The average American, if this were to not go through, would receive the largest tax hike in our country's history. That goes from the person who has $0 in their checking account to the most wealthiest individual that we have in the world. I just want to make that abundantly clear. This piece of legislation, without its support in getting through, will give the American people the largest tax hike in government history, and that is what we are preventing with this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I yield back.
Good. Thank you.
Mr. Bean.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A happy birthday to you and a very good afternoon, Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Secretary, welcome. I'm sorry you have to put up with this, including the profane language that we listen to a lot of folks up here. I don't know, their mom must not have taught them any manners. You, sir, could be anywhere. You don't have to do this. The only thing I can imagine is love of country. And so I want to say thank you. A grateful nation says thank you for your service.
It's an honor.
And thank you for trying. I know it bothers you as a financial guy, and I was a former banker. It bothers you that this country continues to go in the wrong direction financially. So thank you for trying to turn the wheel as little as we possibly can. And I think we're all finding out that wheel can get sticky at times. So thank you for putting some extra muscle in it. And part of turning that wheel is the one big beautiful bill, which, again, thank you for your service. There's so many great things in it. I'm going to ask you that, what's your favorite in just a bit. But first of all, I've talked to some restaurant owners that have confusion and angst over the tax on tips. And so once this legislation is enacted, Treasury will need to update its administrative guidance regarding the treatment of tips, particularly regarding the adjustable gratuities. You know, when the bill is already pre-filled out of tips and will you and Treasury, I know you're going to head this direction anyway, commit that Treasury will clarify its guidance so recommended gratuities such as those added to the bills of large parties where the customer retains the ability to adjust the amount are treated as tips rather than service charges, so the intended target that Congress wants to do it is you don't pay tax on tips. Mr. Secretary, what say you?
Congressman, we have a lot of data on tip income, so this should be a relatively easy endeavor, and we will work to make this as seamless and as efficient as possible so that the working people who receive tips, that it will be expedited and that the small business owners will experience as little paperwork as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That's the right answer. I listened to you. You've been speaking, and you've done marvelous work because you and the DOGE effort have said even before your tenure, Treasury was out of control. Not even the most essential information in its computer disbursement systems, which has led to over $165 billion in improper payments just last year. We double paid things, and then once we paid them, we couldn't figure out why we paid them. I listened to you of what's needed, and guess what? I've got great news, Mr. Secretary. Tomorrow, I, along with Joni Ernst, we're both involved in the DOGE caucuses of each house, is coming up with a financial payment bill that says on every bill that the United States pays, we'll have a brief description of the purpose of the payment, the appropriations account, which the payment is to be withdrawn, the payment reported on usaspending.gov so it's transparent and the world can see where we're spending the money, and then an annual update of all information related to these payments. It's exciting. It's what you asked for. My question is, what do we need to do to get you on board this bill? And you can say you had me at hello if you want to, but how does that sound? Are you excited about that bill?
Sir, I'm excited about accountability on the payments. When I arrived at Treasury, there's something called a TAS, Treasury Accounting Symbol. One third of the disbursements that we sent out every year did not have a TAS. Without a TAS, a payment cannot be linked back to an appropriation. So there are approximately, imagine Treasury, the TGA is the checking account for the United States of America. Above that sits approximately 450 entities, whether it's agencies, that they just send down payment requests and they'd automatically been sent out. For the first time, we asked that it act like a commercially viable enterprise and that task numbers be assigned. And eventually, the goal should be, perhaps you and Senator Ernst, once you pass this, your second goal could be that these entities that sit above Treasury could all pass an audit.
No, amen. We're working with your team now to make sure that everything that you want in that bill is set. So thank you very much. It sounds like we're going to make a great team. Last thing, anything else we need to know on the one big beautiful bill? Is there any misinformation you want to clear up, Mr. Secretary?
Well, I don't think I have the time to clear up the misinformation, but I will say that I believe that the economic impetus, the certainty, because there is a duality between the critics of this administration. All I hear is tariffs. It's like TDS has become tariff derangement syndrome, and that all I hear about is uncertainty from tariffs, but then the same side wants to give us uncertainty on taxes. So let's get this bill done and get the certainty on taxes. We will have certainty on tariffs within some window over the coming quarters.
Amen,
And
Mr.
then
Secretary.
the U.S. economy can realize its full potential.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back. Thank you for being here today.
Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witness for being here this afternoon with us, and making yourself available and answering questions and engaging with the members of this committee. I first wanted to share that, I think back on the last administration, this administration, the transition. There's always going to be changes, ideas and changes, mechanisms in which we're done. But I think we need to talk truth about what the numbers were in each one of those. Now, we know that at the time of President Trump's inauguration, unemployment was at less than 4%. Inflation was below 3%. And the numbers that have been put out about where inflation is now has not really changed month to month when we look at CPI, the Bureau of Labor statistics. Those numbers have not changed significantly from the downward trajectory that happened from 2020. We have continually gone down in inflation. Economic growth at the time of inauguration was at 2.8% in real terms. And that was, according to World Analysis, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The bottom 20% of workers saw the largest real wage gains during the Biden administration. We're going to give Jacket's jacket here in this committee. Additionally, we have seen since January 20th that the stock market overall has gone down 1.3%, and gas has gone up.
Ma'am, that's incorrect.
Excuse me. Let me get something straight with you first here. I've seen you interrupt everyone. When you come to someone's house, you respect their rules. And in this house, we don't interrupt individuals. And you're not going to interrupt my time. I'm going to give you time to respond. You may want to jot down some notes about things that you don't agree with me on so that you can respond to them at that time. But while I'm speaking, as the person holding this time, you will refrain from speaking, sir, until I am done. Until I am done, and then I will give you time to speak, okay?
Look forward to facts.
Thank you. I'll look forward to your response, whether they're factual or incorrect either. Now, one of the things that I noticed that the president, our present president, has said that he was going to do was going to bring down the cost of living. But as we all know, costs have not gone down. Whether they have remained stagnant at the amount that they were at the time of the inauguration or before, or they have gone up, real costs have not gone down for the American individuals. I know that my colleagues want to talk about in this bill what is happening in terms of their support for the American worker. There's a discussion I hear from several colleagues that if this legislation is not passed, it will then trigger the largest tax hike. That's because you made the largest tax cut in 2017 with this bill. And it's not to say that we cannot negotiate, as Congress has used to do, something in between there. It does not have to be this bill. It could, in fact, be something in between there. But that's not what we're doing here in this Congress at this time. Additionally, we have seen that, there's discussion about overtime taxes, overtime, the credit that's going. We know that only 12% of hourly workers receive overtime. And then the discussion about tips, which is only going to affect 2.5% of American workers, and only 40% of tip earners actually file federal taxes. So we are not going to affect everyone that we need to affect. Unfortunately, everyday Americans, the outcome of the supposedly strategic legislation that we have here is very predictable. We're watching the cost of bread, bacon, butter rise, egg prices continuing to go up, and the rising cost is not going to happen. One individual who I follow, James Serwicki, a classmate of mine actually from prep school who was at Yale, discusses that there's no acceleration of economic growth in this legislation because there's not being meaningful cutting of tax rates. We are going to be reducing spending, that's correct, but there are intended consequences to that as well. Additionally, let's talk about DOGE. $2 trillion, $1 trillion, $150 billion. Those were what we said the savings were going to be. I'm concerned that with this legislation as well, we are not going to see the real numbers. The numbers that are put out are not going to be, in fact, the real ones. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Mr. Murrian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary, for being here today. You didn't get a chance to respond to Ms. Plaskett, so I'm going to give you a chance to respond, Secretary Bessent. Where did she go wrong in her statement?
Well, first of all, I would fire the staffer who did that chart because it stopped in February 2025, and prices are down substantially since then. But that's an inconvenient truth. Secondly, the S&P, if the Congresswoman would care to check Bloomberg, the stock market, as judged by the S&P, which is the most widely held index by American 401ks, is up on the year. Up.
It is up month by month.
No. Excuse me, ma'am. It's my time.
And we don't interrupt. Excuse me, we don't interrupt is what I was learned. Since January 1st, it is my business for 40 years to know what the stock market does, and it is up on the year. So,
thank you for that clarification, Secretary. I want to go back and look at a little bit more history, some recent history. When Democrats had the trifecta just a few years ago as part of their Inflation Reduction Act, which actually skyrocketed inflation, they enacted their so-called Corporate Alternative Minimum Tax, or CAMT as it's known, a wildly complex and burdensome 15% minimum tax for job creators across America. This policy was so difficult to implement that even Biden's Treasury Department could not finalize regulations after 2 years of the law being enacted. That's why I was pleased, Secretary, to see that the IRS last week released guidance that provides relief from the CAMT. The guidance provides tax penalty relief for the 2025 year, but perhaps more importantly, the IRS announced that it will not finalize the Biden administration's proposed CAMT regulations in their current form, but will instead issue additional guidance in response to taxpayer comments. I know I personally heard from several constituents concerned about this disastrous minimum tax. Secretary Bessent, could you please elaborate on the recent action that the Treasury Department and the IRS took to provide taxpayer relief from the CAMT and preview any future action the administration might take?
Sir, the KMT is part of an overall simplification for businesses, and we have tried to do that across the board where we've seen it. As several members on the Republican side of the aisle have pointed out, this is a pro-business administration. I would categorize the previous administration as few business people, academics, career politicians.
Secretary, let's go back even further in history. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy faced a critical economic situation due to years of excessively high tax rates, wasteful government spending, and undulating unemployment rates. His proposed solution at the time, what was it? It was lowering taxes, both for individuals and for corporations. And by doing this, and in doing this, this is what he said. He said, quote, "This will restore an idea that has helped make our country great, that a person who devotes his efforts to increasing his income, thereby adding to the nation's income and wealth, should be able to retain a reasonable share of the results. I happen to believe that more hardworking Americans need to retain more and more of what they earn, and the more of that they retain, the better. It brings liberty to their lives. This is the idea precisely that I think President Trump is trying to get to through his Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, and then once again in the One Big Beautiful Bill. If you want to increase innovation, spur economic growth, and raise overall revenues, you lower taxes for everybody and put more money in the hands of hardworking Americans, small businesses, and farmers. Would you agree with that proposition, Secretary Bessent? And would you say that the One Big Beautiful Bill is perhaps the most pro-growth, pro-worker, pro-business legislation since the TCJA, maybe even more so?
Congressman Moran, what you are alluding to, that President Kennedy said was, and I will tie it back to this horrendous inflation that we saw during the Biden administration. His economic advisor was a Yale professor, James Tobin, and he asked Professor Tobin, what is the governing factor on government spending? It's inflation, isn't it? And I'm afraid that Secretary Yellen, who was a dissertation student of Professor Tobin, did not heed that lesson as we got the great inflation during the past period from this government spending. And look, I think that this is the nature of U.S. enterprise. This is why we have the greatest economy in the world. This is why Europe cannot get out of its own way. China has a command and control economy, that we push for Americans to be able to keep more of their own money, to simplify starting businesses, and that is what we are trying to do. And that's why, as I said, trade, tax, but deregulation is going to be very important here, because what we are finding is that it is very difficult. One of the reasons it's difficult to make or build things in this country is because of regulation. If you try to build a pipeline, you need certainty that for us to be energy dominant, to build an electric grid, if we are going to be the AI superpower that we are on our way to being, it will require a substantial increase in generation capacity. So permitting new electrical generation, but equally as important, permitting the transmission. We need government to be a partner, not an adversary.
I wholeheartedly agree, Secretary Bessent. The more liberty for our businesses and our individuals, our families, and our farmers, the better for our economy. It spurs innovation and economic growth. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Mr. Swazi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. It's been a long day. We appreciate the time that you've spent with us, especially considering your travel schedule and how tired you must be. Thank you very much for your service to our country. We're very grateful to you. You complimented one of our colleagues earlier about it's great to see something bipartisan happening. There's very little bipartisan things going on right now, but to make bipartisan things happen, you have to talk to the other side. You have to negotiate with each other. And every problem we face in our country is complicated, and you can't solve a complicated problem in an environment of fear and anger where we just see everybody yelling and screaming at each other like this. So I would love to work with you, and I'm sure many of my other colleagues would like to work with you on the tariffs. As the ranking member, Mr. Neal, mentioned earlier, we negotiated together on USMCA. We'd like to negotiate together using our congressional authority on tariffs. You talked about de minimis earlier. The president did an executive order. I have a bill on de minimis. Linda Sanchez, who's the chair of the subcommittee, has a bill on de minimis, wants to do the same things that the administration does. Let's do it for real. Let's do it together. You talked about, the president talked about negotiating drug prices, could save a lot of money for the federal government for Medicaid and Medicare. Let's do it together. Let's most Democrats are in favor of negotiating drug prices for Medicaid and Medicare. Let's work together to accomplish these complicated issues. Immigration is a very big issue for me. I know that's not really your area. Waste, fraud, and abuse. Mr. Bean is part of a DOJ caucus. I'd love to work on going after waste, fraud, and abuse, but I think the DOJ caucus, the DOJ operation under Elon Musk did a terrible job. They cut the people overseeing the nuclear stockpile. They said that we have to hire them back. They cut the people overseeing the avian flu. They had to hire them back. They cut the people overseeing the measles outbreak. They had to hire them back. They started at $2 trillion, and they said $1 trillion we're going to cut. Then they said $150 billion we're going to cut, and it's going to cost that much in lawsuits and all the inefficiencies that were created. Do you think that DOGE under Mr. Musk did a good job?
I think that DOGE under Mr. Musk has set in motion an ethos that
No, I understand the
hope
ethos, but under Mr. Musk, do you think they did a good job?
that I hope we can continue throughout the government.
But not the ethos of cutting people from the nuclear stockpile. That wasn't a good ethos, was it?
As I say at Treasury, we move deliberately and fix things.
Right, so they didn't move very deliberately, did they? They moved kind of scattershot.
The Congressman, I have the benefit of the DOGE people who are full Treasury employees who either I or
I understand that, and I appreciate that. I want to ask you about Mr. Musk's overseeing of DOGE.
But my senior staff interviewed these DOGE people who are not DOGE people, they are Treasury people, have been incredibly
And
adamant.
I believe you, Mr. Secretary. Do you think that Mr. Musk did a good job overseeing DOGE? Because it's been reported that you said he was a fraud, that the whole thing was a fraud. Do you agree with that statement, or is that inappropriately reported?
Fake news.
Fake news, okay. So, Mr. Secretary, I agree with 75% of the stuff that's in the big bill that you guys talk about. We call it the big ugly bill, not the big beautiful bill. There's three things that I really don't like about it a lot. I don't like that we're continuing the cuts in tax breaks that we're giving to the wealthiest Americans from 39.6 down to 37. I think that's a deficit-producing, unnecessary tax cut that's going to just increase the deficit and not do anything to increase economic productivity in our country. The second thing I don't like is that we're cutting so much Medicaid for so many people in need, and we're cutting the food assistance program for so many people in need. And the third thing I don't like is this whole thing we've been hearing a lot about today, the deficits that have been created. Now, you don't agree with the CBO. We've heard that several times. You also disagree with the Committee for Responsible Budget, who said that there's going to be a $3 trillion deficit from this. You disagree with that also, right? Yes. And you disagree with the Yale Budget Lab. You went to Yale. You don't agree with the Yale Budget Lab. They say it's going to be a $3 trillion deficit from this. Do you disagree with them also?
There are a lot of things I disagree with Yale on these.
Do you disagree with the Penn-Wharton budget model, who said there's going to be a $3 trillion deficit from this bill?
Yes.
You disagree with Elon Musk, who you supposedly do get along with now. It will massively increase the already gigantic deficit to $2.5 trillion and burden American citizens with crushingly unsustainable debt. Do you disagree with Mr. Musk on that issue?
Yes.
Do you disagree with Ray Dalio, who said that this is unsustainable?
I agree with Ray Dalio that we need to get our fiscal house in order.
Do you disagree with Jamie Dimon, who says it's going to cause a crack in the bond markets?
I met with Mr. Dimon the other day, and he wasn't necessarily referring to government finances.
He said there's going to be a crack that's going to take place in either 6 months or 6 years. And let's ask you, when do you think that's going to happen?
I believe he was referring to market structure.
Do you think that do you disagree with Mr. Fink from BlackRock, who said this is going to be an unsustainable problem as well?
I believe that we have to get our fiscal house in order.
Let me just ask one more question, if I can. Do you think the interest rates right now are too high, too low, or just right?
When I came into office as Treasury Secretary, I said that I would not discuss interest rates or Federal Reserve policy. I would not talk about the mistakes they're going to make, only the mistakes they've made. But
you said earlier that a good economy made the interest rates go up under the last tax bill. So you're proposing that this current tax bill will be good for the economy, make the economy stronger. Will that cause the interest rates to go up? I'm not commenting on Federal Reserve policy, but I'm talking about the inflationary effects of what you say would be a good economy.
Well, I think you're conflating a good economy with strong growth. Under President Trump, we had strong growth.
And interest rates went up, you said. You just said in your previous testimony that caused interest rates to go up.
That the Fed raises rates because growth is strong. So
do you think interest rates are going to go up under this bill?
If we have strong non-inflationary growth, perhaps we are already, Congressman, the market lives in the future. Perhaps we have already priced in the growth and the passage of this bill, so we will see.
Well, I've already taken too much time, but let me just say I'm very concerned that the increasing deficits, the tariffs, and the reduction of the workforce happening from some of the deportations that are happening are all going to be inflationary. And And they're all going to cause inflation. They're going to cause interest rates to stay high or get higher. And it's something that we all need to be concerned about. And these complicated problems that we face require us to work together to try the debate of lively minds to try and figure out how we can make our country better and stronger. And this one-way issue of it's my way or the highway, and we're not going to work together, it's not going to work for our country.
Over.
Thank you.
I was very reliant, but a minute 52 is a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary, thank you for spending almost 5 hours in taking questions from this committee. I know some of the questions were out of line and unacceptable, and I appreciate how you handled it, and I appreciate how you represented the administration. Please be advised that members have 2 weeks to submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. With that, the committee stands adjourned.